Welcome back to another story on No Harry. This time, we're bringing you, What If Wednesday Addams Found Harry in Cupboard at age 6 and Tortured Dursleys with Dark Magic Daily. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard. The Addams family's car was not supposed to break down on Privet Drive. It was not supposed to be anywhere near Privet Drive. The street was, by every measurable standard, the most aggressively normal road in Surrey, possibly in all of England, and the massive, oil-black touring car that shuddered to a halt outside number 3 was the kind of vehicle that made curtains twitch and neighbors reach for their phones. It looked like something that had driven out of a funeral and enjoyed the experience. The chrome was the color of old bones. The windows were tinted so dark they seemed to absorb the afternoon light rather than merely block it. A hand-painted crest on the door featured what appeared to be a severed hand holding a torch, though it was difficult to say for certain because looking at it too long made people feel vaguely unwell. Gomez Addams stepped out first, resplendent in a pinstripe suit at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, a cigar clamped between his teeth and an expression of delighted outrage on his face. He kicked the front tire with genuine feeling. "Magnificent," he announced. "She's given up entirely. Right here, in the middle of," he looked around at the identical houses, the trimmed hedges, the hanging baskets full of cheerful petunias, and his voice dropped to something approaching reverence, "this extraordinary place." Morticia unfolded from the passenger side like a shadow becoming a person. She was wearing black, as she always wore black, and the afternoon sun seemed to think twice about touching her. She surveyed the street with the polite interest of someone visiting a zoo where all the animals were very small and very beige. "Gomez," she said, "it looks like a set from a film about people who've never had an interesting thought." "Precisely." He kissed her hand. "Isn't it wonderful?" From the back seat came Pugsley, who was carrying something in a jar that was best not examined closely, and then Wednesday. Wednesday Addams was 6 years old and already the sort of person that made adults instinctively lower their voices. She had 2 black braids, a black dress, white collar, and eyes that had the particular quality of old water, still, dark, and unfathomable in depth. She stepped onto the pavement of Privet Drive and looked at it the way a scientist might look at a sample of something potentially toxic. She found it extremely interesting. Not because it was pleasant. It was not pleasant. It was the opposite of pleasant in a way that looped back around and became fascinating, the sheer totality of its normalness, the almost aggressive insistence that nothing here was unusual, that no one here was unusual, that unusual was a thing that happened somewhere else to someone else and wasn't welcome in this postcode. Wednesday had an instinct for things that were hidden. She'd had it since she was very small, the same way some children had an instinct for music or for maths. She could feel the shape of secrets the way other people felt weather changes in old joints. Privet Drive was absolutely full of something it was pretending very hard wasn't there. She started walking. "Wednesday," Morticia called, without particular urgency. "Don't terrorize anyone who hasn't deserved it yet." "I'm just exploring," Wednesday said. She walked past number 4, studying it the way she studied everything, with complete attention and no expression whatsoever. It looked like the others. Red brick, white trim, a car in the drive that had been polished with something approaching religious devotion. A large woman inside was doing something violent to a flower bed. Wednesday stopped. There was a small window set into the foundation of the house, just beside the front steps. Low to the ground. The kind of window that belonged to a cupboard. She wouldn't have noticed it at all. Why would anyone notice a cupboard window, except that the curtain on the inside moved? Not the way curtains moved when air came through a gap. The way curtains moved when someone moved them. She walked to the window and crouched down. Her dress pooled around her on the front path and she didn't care. She pulled aside the small, dirty curtain with one finger. A boy looked back at her. He was small, smaller than Wednesday, and she was small for 6, with black hair that went in every direction as though it had strong opinions about the matter, and round glasses held together at the bridge with a piece of tape. His eyes were very green and very wide, and there was a bruise on his jaw that was at least 3 days old. He was sitting on a cot that barely qualified as furniture, in a space that barely qualified as a room. There was a bare bulb above him. The walls were the underside of the stairs. She could see the outline of each step in the sloped ceiling above his head. They looked at each other through the dirty glass. Wednesday had read a great many books. She was, for 6, extraordinarily well-read, mostly because her family's library ran heavily to the kind of texts that other families didn't keep in libraries, or in houses, or anywhere accessible to children. She had read about dungeons. She had been in her family's dungeon, which was comfortable and familiar and smelled of home. This was not a dungeon. This was worse than a dungeon because at least a dungeon was honest about what it was. The boy's eyes were doing something that Wednesday recognized. They were braced for something bad to happen, the way eyes looked when bad things had happened so regularly that they'd stopped being surprising and started being expected. She put her palm flat against the glass. He stared at it for a moment. Then, slowly, he put his palm against the other side. Wednesday stood up. She walked to the front door and knocked. The woman from the flower bed came around the side of the house, stripping off her gardening gloves, and stopped when she saw Wednesday. The woman was large in the way of someone who'd put considerable effort into looking respectable, with a neck slightly too long for her head and pale eyes that moved in small, calculating increments. "Can I help you?" she said, in a voice that meant the opposite. "There is a boy in your cupboard," Wednesday said. The woman's face did something complicated and quick. "That's none of my nephew lives with us. He has his own space, it's a cupboard under the stairs," Wednesday said. "He has a bruise on his face. He's clumsy." The words came out fast, rehearsed. "Falls over constantly, you know how boys are. Who are you? Where are your parents?" "Our car broke down," Wednesday said, pointing without looking. The woman looked at the Addams car and visibly reconsidered the entire morning. Then she pulled herself back together and fixed Wednesday with the kind of smile that was mostly teeth. "Well, you should go back to your parents. This isn't anything to do with you." "What's his name?" Wednesday asked. "What?" "The boy in the cupboard. What is his name?" Something shifted in the woman's face. A calculation. "Harry," she said, sharply, as though the word cost her something. "Harry Potter. And he's fine, so, I'd like to speak with him." "You absolutely may not, Mrs." Wednesday tilted her head. "Dursley," the woman snapped. "Mrs. Dursley, and I'm telling you to go back to your parents before I call, Mrs. Dursley." Wednesday's voice was level and gray and completely without heat, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "I would like to speak with the boy in the cupboard, please." Petunia Dursley was not a foolish woman. She was small-minded and frightened and deeply concerned with appearances, but she wasn't stupid. She looked at this child, this small, dead-eyed, utterly still child in her black dress on her front path, and felt something she couldn't name. A prickling at the back of her skull. The kind of feeling she hadn't felt since she was a girl, since her sister had done things that made the world go sideways. 5 minutes, she said, before she'd decided to say it. "And you stay in the hall." The inside of number 4 Privet Drive was immaculate in the way of a house where cleanliness was a moral position. Wednesday stepped inside, registered the overwhelming taupe, and followed Mrs. Dursley to the cupboard door under the stairs. There was a lock on it. A lock on the outside. Petunia unlocked it. The door swung open and Harry Potter blinked in the sudden additional light. He was even smaller than he'd seemed through the window. He had a book open on his lap, a schoolbook, fraying at the spine, clearly second-hand, and he looked at Petunia first, automatically, the way you looked at the thing you were most careful around. Then he looked at Wednesday. "Hello," Wednesday said. "I'm Wednesday Addams. I saw you through the window." Harry looked at her with the particular expression of someone trying to determine whether this was a trick. "Hi," he said, carefully. How long have you lived in the cupboard? He glanced at his aunt. Petunia's lips were pressed into a line so thin it had nearly ceased to exist. Since I can remember, Harry said. Do you sleep in there? Yes. Do they lock the door? Petunia made a sound. Harry said nothing, which was an answer. Wednesday turned to look at Petunia Dursley with the full weight of her attention. Petunia had the sudden, absurd sensation of being a beetle under a pin. I see, Wednesday said. She said it the way a judge might say it. Or an executioner. She looked back at Harry. Would you like to come outside? He stared. I don't usually. He looked at his aunt again. Harry, Wednesday said, and something in the evenness of her voice seemed to reach him, would you like to come outside? Yes, he said. Very quietly. Yes, please. He climbed out. He was wearing clothes that were enormous on him, clearly hand-me-down sized for someone 2 or 3 times his width. He stood in the hallway blinking, and Wednesday noticed that he flinched slightly when Petunia moved, even when she was just shifting her weight. She filed this away. Right, Petunia said, pulling herself to her full height. 5 minutes in the garden, and then, we'll be outside, Wednesday said. She walked Harry to the front door and out into the afternoon. He stood on the front step and tilted his face up to the sun with an unconscious pleasure that made Wednesday feel something she didn't yet have a name for. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like the feeling she got from very old, very honest books, the kind that didn't soften what they were describing. How often do they let you outside? She asked. When there's gardening to do, he said. Or if Dudley wants someone to practice hitting. He said this completely matter-of-factly, the way you described the weather. Wednesday studied him. Dudley is the other boy. My cousin. He pushed his glasses up his nose. He's big. I'm supposed to stay out of the way. In the cupboard's easiest. He glanced at her sideways, with a look that was trying to figure out why she was asking. You don't have to feel sorry for me. Everyone who feels sorry for me doesn't actually do anything about it. Wednesday blinked. It was the most expression she'd shown since arriving on Privet Drive. I don't feel sorry for you, she said. I'm angry. He looked at her properly for the first time. They locked you in a cupboard, she said. There's a lock on the outside. You flinch when they move. You haven't been outside today. Her voice was perfectly steady. I'm not feeling sorry for you. I'm deciding what to do about it. Harry Potter, who had never in his life had anyone say anything like that to him, stood very still. What do you mean? I mean, Wednesday said, that my family's car broke down on this street, which I don't believe in coincidences. She paused, and something moved behind her eyes that was either extremely intelligent or extremely dangerous or both, and I found you, and now I'm going to talk to my parents. About what? About whether you're coming with us. Harry stared at her. His mouth opened. Closed. You can't just, you don't even know me. I know enough. She was already walking back toward the touring car, which was sitting outside number 3 with the particular self-possession of a vehicle that knew it was the most interesting thing on the street. Come on. He followed her. Partly because he couldn't think of a reason not to. Partly because she had the kind of presence that made not following feel like the weirder option. Gomez was under the bonnet, delighted by what he'd found wrong with the engine, which appeared to be several things simultaneously. Morticia was sitting on the front bumper reading a slim black book, and Pugsley was trying to interest a neighborhood cat in his jar. Maman, Wednesday said. Morticia looked up from her book and saw Harry standing behind her daughter with the expression of someone who'd stepped into a story and wasn't sure yet which kind. She closed the book and regarded him with the calm, complete attention she gave to everything. Wednesday, she said, you've brought someone. His name is Harry. He lives in number 4. Wednesday paused. In the cupboard under the stairs. Morticia's eyes moved to Harry. Then to number 4. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, she wasn't a dramatic woman, but the quality of the stillness changed. Gomez emerged from under the bonnet with a smear of oil on his cheek and enthusiasm in every feature. "Hello, my boy. Gomez Addams. Magnificent hair you've got, doesn't it remind you of mine at that age, Tish?" "He lives in the cupboard," Wednesday repeated. Gomez's enthusiasm didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something sharper. He looked at Harry the way he looked at things that mattered. "Does he now?" he said softly. "There's a lock on the outside of the door," Wednesday said. "He sleeps in there. His cousin hits him for sport." Harry had gone very red. "You don't have to say all that," he said. "Why not? It's true. He stopped. He looked at the ground. "It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing," Wednesday said, tasting the word, "is the wrong response to someone else's cruelty." Gomez crouched down so he was eye level with Harry. He had the cigar in one hand and oil on the other, and he looked at Harry with an expression of absolute, uncomplicated attention. "How old are you, Harry?" "6. Have you any family besides these people?" Harry shook his head. "They say my parents died in a car crash." Gomez and Morticia exchanged a look over Harry's head that contained an entire conversation. "Well," Gomez said, standing, "the car isn't going anywhere today regardless." "Lurch?" He raised his voice and the driver's side window rolled down to reveal a very large face topped by a single dark eyebrow. "We'll be here overnight. Make arrangements." A sound emerged from the car that might have been agreement. Wednesday looked at Harry. "You can sleep in a real bed," she said. "We'll find somewhere to stay." "I can't just leave," Harry said, though his voice was doing something uncertain around the edges. My aunt will, yes," Wednesday said. "She will." She glanced at number 4. "I'll handle that." She walked back to the front door of the Dursley house and rang the bell. Petunia answered it with the coiled tension of someone who'd been watching from a window. Where's Harry? Where has he gone?" "You had no right to take him anywhere. I'll call the police." Harry is with my family," Wednesday said. "We're staying in the area tonight. He'll sleep somewhere with a window." Petunia's face went through several colors. "You cannot just take my nephew, you little, who do you think you are? I'll have your parents arrested." Wednesday looked at her. Just looked at her. And something in the quality of that gaze, 6 years old, black braids, white collar, utterly without fear, made Petunia Dursley's voice trail off. "He'll be back tomorrow," Wednesday said. "We'll talk about his living situation then. With my parents." She paused. "Please have a pleasant evening, Mrs. Dursley." She walked away. Behind her, Petunia stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she stepped back inside and closed the door very quietly, which was more frightening, somehow, than if she'd slammed it. The Addams family found a bed and breakfast at the edge of the village, the kind of establishment that didn't ask too many questions, especially not after Gomez paid for the largest available room in cash and tipped the owner with an amount that made her briefly question her entire system of values. Morticia had, with an efficiency that Harry found astonishing, produced from the car boot an overnight bag, a change of clothes for Wednesday, a spare something or other for Pugsley, and a small black nightgown for herself. Harry sat at the table in the room and ate, which was the thing he remembered most about that evening afterward. Not the strangeness of the family, not the way the disembodied hand that lived in the car, apparently, patted him on the head when he walked past, not even the way Gomez told stories about his various adventures in a way that made it impossible to tell what was true. What he remembered was eating an entire plate of food and nobody saying he'd had enough, nobody watching how much he took, nobody making a comment about not wasting what he didn't deserve. He ate until he was full. It was the first time he could remember doing that. Wednesday sat across from him and watched him eat with those still, dark eyes, and when he finally pushed the plate away she said, "Better?" "Yeah," he said. He pushed his glasses up. Thanks. Don't thank me. I didn't make the food. I know. But. He looked at the table. Thanks anyway. She considered this. All right. They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind, which was new enough for Harry that he wasn't entirely sure how to inhabit it. Your family is strange, he said, and then went rigid with horror at himself. Sorry, I didn't mean, thank you, Wednesday said. He blinked. What? Thank you. Strange is the correct word for us. She picked up her fork and turned it over in her fingers with the contemplative air of someone who might use it as a weapon. Normal is the other word and I don't want it. Harry looked at her. Right, he said slowly. Then, with something unlocking in him, good, then. Because your brother put something that's still moving in his pocket at dinner and I didn't know if I was supposed to say anything. The worm, Wednesday said. He's training it. For what? He hasn't decided yet. She tilted her head. It bothers you? No, Harry said, and realized as he said it that this was true. Actually no. I once had a snake in the garden that Aunt Petunia made me get rid of. I didn't want to. Wednesday looked at him with slightly more interest. What happened to it? I let it go in the park. But he stopped. Pressed his lips together. I talked to it first. Told it where to go where they wouldn't find it. I don't know if that's mad. Wednesday stared at him. You talked to the snake. I know and did it answer? A pause. Harry's expression went through something complicated. It moved the direction I told it to, he said carefully. It looked at me. It felt like it understood. Wednesday was quiet for a moment. Harry, she said, are you aware that sometimes things happen around you that you can't quite explain? He went very still. How do you know about that? Because things happen around me that I can't explain either, she said. Except I've decided they don't need explaining. They just need to be used. She said it the way other children said things like I want to be a veterinarian. Completely, calmly certain. Harry looked at her across the table, this strange, still, self-possessed girl who had crouched on the front path of number 4 Privet Drive and changed his entire afternoon without appearing to think it was anything remarkable, and felt something settle in his chest that hadn't been settled before. What sort of things happen around you? He asked. Plants die when I'm sad, she said. Fast. Like they decide to. She considered. Father finds it romantic. Mother says it's a gift. Pugsley set something on fire with his mind once but I don't think he's done it since. I made my teacher's chair fall apart once, Harry said quietly. All the screws just came out. She'd been horrible to me and I was very angry and then, all the screws came out. He looked at his hands. They thought it was defective. But I knew. Wednesday nodded, as though this were entirely ordinary information. It's magic, she said. He looked up sharply. That's not, it is, she said. I've read enough to know what it looks like. My grandmother's grimoires describe it. Untrained, uncontrolled, connected to emotion. It's magic, and you have it, and whoever put you in that cupboard knew. She paused. That's the part that interests me most. He stared at her. What do you mean, knew? Your aunt, Wednesday said. When I told her I'd seen you through the window, she wasn't just embarrassed or caught out. She was afraid. She set down the fork. Not afraid of trouble. Afraid of you. Specifically. The way people are afraid of something they don't understand and can't control. Her eyes met his. She knows what you are. Which means she knew your parents. Which means the car crash story is likely a lie. Harry sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the summer evening was going slowly golden, and he could hear Gomez in the next room engaged in what sounded like fencing practice, and Morticia's voice occasionally redirecting him. If it's magic, Harry said slowly, why don't I know anything about it? Because, Wednesday said, with perfect, quiet certainty, someone didn't want you to. She let that sit. Then Gomez appeared in the doorway, jacket slightly rumpled, sword nowhere in sight, with the specific expression of someone who'd been thinking about something serious and brought it to its conclusion. Harry, my boy. I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, because dishonesty bores me terribly. Harry straightened. There was something about Gomez that made you want to be honest. Not because he was frightening, he was warm as open flame, but because he was so completely sincere that lying near him felt structurally unsound. Okay. Do you want to go back to those people tomorrow? Harry opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I don't, I have to, don't I? They're my family. They are your family by blood, Gomez said, sitting down across from him and leaning his elbows on the table with the total attention of a man for whom nothing else in the world existed at this moment. That's a fact. It's also the least interesting fact I know. Here is a more interesting fact. He held up a finger. Family is about who feeds you and who puts a lock on the outside of your door, and those two things should never belong to the same people. Harry looked at the table. The other question, Gomez said gently, is where you would go. You're 6. You can't simply come with us unless certain arrangements are made, legal ones, which my lawyer is already researching because I called him from the road. He caught Harry's expression. I called him before I asked you. Because I believe in being prepared and also because I am extremely impatient. Harry almost smiled. It looked like a foreign expression on his face, like a word he knew the meaning of but hadn't used much. You called your lawyer before talking to me? Talking to you is more important, Gomez said earnestly, but it takes longer to get lawyers on the phone. He spread his hands. I like to multitask. Wednesday, who had been watching this with the expression she reserved for things she approved of, said, he called 3 lawyers. Also a private investigator. The investigator is just to know what we're dealing with, Gomez said, unabashed. The point remains. He looked at Harry. Do you want to go back? A long silence. Outside, a car went past. A dog barked somewhere on Privet Drive, very normal, very unimportant. No, Harry said. Very quietly. But steady. I don't want to go back. Gomez smiled, and when Addams smiled it was the kind of smile that made rooms feel warmer and ceilings feel higher. Good, he said. That is excellent. That is exactly what we needed to hear. He stood and clapped his hands once, with the energy of a man who has solved a problem and is already thinking about the next one. Wednesday looked at Harry across the table. Harry looked back at her. Tomorrow, she said, we're going back to number 4. Why? Because you left some things in the cupboard, she said. And because I have a few things to say to your aunt. Harry thought about Petunia's face at the door. He thought about the lock on the outside. He thought about 6 years of cupboards and hand-me-down clothes and not enough food and being told he was nothing. She won't like that, he said. I know, Wednesday said, and something in her voice was the darkest, calmest, most satisfied thing Harry had ever heard. That's rather the point. The night passed. Harry slept in an actual bed, in the corner of the room that Gomez and Morticia had given over to the children with the cheerful generosity of people who'd never questioned the logistics. Pugsley fell asleep immediately and dramatically, face down, jar on the nightstand. Wednesday read by the light of a small lamp, a book from the car boot that Harry couldn't quite make out the title of. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how a single afternoon had undone 6 years of something he believed was just how his life was. He couldn't quite manage it. But he could feel that it had happened. Before he fell asleep he said, Wednesday. What? She said, without looking up from her book. How did you know to look in the window? A pause. She turned a page. I told you. I don't believe in coincidences. But how, the street felt wrong, she said. Happy streets with secrets underneath them feel a specific kind of wrong. Like there's something pressing up against the surface from below. She looked at him over the top of her book. Your magic was pressing up. Even locked in a cupboard, it was trying to be noticed. Harry thought about this. And you noticed. I notice things, she said simply. It's what I do. She went back to her book. Harry fell asleep, and for the first time in memory, he didn't dream about the green light. Morning came with the particular clarity of a day that intends to be significant. Harry woke to find Gomez had already been out and returned with an enormous and thoroughly unsuitable breakfast, 3 different types of pastry, black coffee that was meant for the adults but that Pugsley drank anyway, fruit that Pugsley didn't touch, and a selection of jams that Gomez had apparently chosen based on their color rather than their flavor. They ate. Harry had 2 pastries and nobody said anything. He had a third and still nobody said anything. His eyes went slightly wide. You're allowed to be hungry, Morticia said, without looking up from her tea. She had the kind of voice that managed to be entirely gentle and entirely unflinching simultaneously. Being hungry and being fed are straightforwardly connected things. There's no moral element. Harry took the 3rd pastry. By 9 o'clock they were walking back down Privet Drive, the whole family, which was its own kind of spectacle, Gomez in a fresh suit, cane in hand, Morticia in a floor-length black dress that was not remotely suited to a Tuesday morning in Surrey but suited her entirely, Pugsley in something that had once been clean, Wednesday in her usual dress and braids, and Harry beside Wednesday, wearing his enormous overlarge clothes and carrying nothing because there was nothing to carry. Curtains moved in every window they passed. Gomez didn't notice. Or noticed and found it wonderful. Petunia opened the door before they knocked. She'd been watching from inside. She looked at all of them and her face went through a rapid sequence of emotions, fear, anger, the particular social horror of what the neighbors must think, and then something underneath all of it that was more complicated and older. Mrs. Dursley, Gomez said warmly, as though they were old friends meeting for brunch. Good morning. I'm Gomez Addams. I believe you've met my daughter. I wonder if we might come in. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The House at the End of the World. Petunia Dursley did not want them to come in. This was visible in every line of her body, the way she gripped the door frame, the way her eyes moved to the neighbors' windows, the way her jaw set itself like concrete. She was a woman who had built her entire life on the principle that what was inside stayed inside and what was outside stayed outside, and the Addams family standing on her front step was a fundamental violation of that principle. I don't think, she started. Wonderful, Gomez said, stepping inside. He didn't push past her. He didn't force anything. He simply moved with the absolute, cheerful confidence of a man who had never once in his life considered that a doorway might be closed to him, and the sheer momentum of that certainty carried him through. Morticia followed with the serene inevitability of a tide. Pugsley went next, already looking around with the frank assessment of a child cataloguing potential. Wednesday and Harry came last, and Wednesday looked at Petunia as she passed with a gaze that sat between them for a moment like a physical object. Petunia closed the door. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her thighs. The sitting room of number 4 was extremely clean and extremely beige and felt, with the Addams family standing in it, like a fish tank that had been stocked with something other than fish. Gomez looked around at it with genuine interest. Morticia touched a porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece with one finger, very lightly, as though making a diagnosis. Vernon Dursley appeared from the kitchen in his dressing gown, red-faced and already heading toward outrage. He was a large man, wide in every direction, with a mustache that seemed to be working independently from the rest of his face. He stopped when he saw the room. What in the bloody, who are these people? Petunia, what is going on? Mr. Dursley, Gomez said, extending his hand with enormous goodwill. Gomez Addams. Your wife was kind enough to invite us in. Vernon looked at his wife. I did not, Petunia started. Please, sit down, Morticia said. And somehow, in the way she said it, it became the obvious and natural thing to do. Vernon sat. Petunia sat. Neither of them seemed entirely sure how it had happened. Harry stood just inside the door with Wednesday beside him and watched his aunt and uncle fold in the face of people who simply didn't acknowledge resistance as a concept, and felt something he would later identify as the first lesson he ever learned about power. Pugsley had found Dudley. Dudley Dursley was large for 6, soft in the way of a child who'd never been told no about food and frequently been told yes about hitting, and he'd come thundering down the stairs with the expectation of breakfast and the general attitude of a small emperor. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom when he saw Pugsley. Pugsley looked at him with the open assessment of a scientist considering a new specimen. He had the jar under his arm. What's that? Dudley demanded, pointing at the jar. Worms, Pugsley said pleasantly. Do you want to see? Dudley recoiled. Then his expression shifted to the specific cruelty of children who've been allowed to be cruel without consequence. That's disgusting. You're disgusting. What's wrong with you? Pugsley considered this. A lot of things, probably, he said. Do you want to see the worms or not? In the sitting room, Vernon had gathered himself sufficiently to locate his outrage again. Now look here, he said, pointing at Gomez in a way that men who'd met Gomez before generally learn not to do. You cannot simply walk into my house and, your nephew has been sleeping in a cupboard, Gomez said. He said it simply, the way you stated whether. Not accusatory. Just factual. He has a bruise on his jaw that's 3 days old. He flinches when adults move near him. He ate last night as though he wasn't sure the food was going to stay available. Vernon's face went deep red. Now you listen here, that boy, I'm not finished, Gomez said, pleasantly. Vernon stopped. Partly because of the tone, which remained entirely cordial. Partly because there was something in Gomez Addams's eyes when he was being serious about something that was less like looking at a person and more like looking at a force of nature that happened to be wearing a suit. I have a lawyer, Gomez continued, producing a card from his breast pocket and setting it on the coffee table with a small precise click. His name is Nestor Broadmoor and he is very good at his job. He's been researching your legal guardianship of Harry since yesterday afternoon. He smiled, and it was warm, and it didn't reach his eyes. The lock on the outside of the cupboard door is interesting, legally speaking. Petunia's breath came in sharply. I'm not here to make trouble, Gomez said, which was possibly true in the technical sense that he hadn't planned to make trouble, though trouble had a way of finding him anyway. I'm here because my daughter found your nephew and brought him to us, and we've spent an evening with him, and I would like to discuss a more formal arrangement. You want to take him, Petunia said. Her voice was flat and strange. We'd like to provide him a home, Morticia said. A real one. Something moved through Petunia's face. Not guilt, quite. More like the particular expression of someone who has been carrying a heavy object for a very long time and has just been offered the chance to set it down, but isn't sure whether setting it down is safe. You don't understand, she said. What he is. What it means, having him here. He's a child, Morticia said. He's not, Petunia stopped. Her eyes moved to Harry, standing in the doorway. Something complicated lived in her expression when she looked at him. He's dangerous, she said. Things happen around him. Strange things. Yes, Wednesday said from the doorway. Magic things. The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. Vernon went so red he was approaching purple. Petunia went the color of chalk. Harry went very still. We don't use that word in this house, Vernon started, in a voice that was working hard to be commanding and mostly achieving strangled. We know, Wednesday said. She walked into the room and stood in the middle of it as though she'd decided she lived there, and looked at the Dursleys with complete equanimity. That's part of the problem. Wednesday, Morticia said, mildly. It's relevant, Wednesday said. Vernon stood up. He was a large man and he used his size the way some people used volume, as a blunt instrument. I don't know who you people are or what you think you're doing in my home, but I am telling you, that boy stays here because we are his only family, and there is nothing you can do about it, and if you don't leave in the next 5 minutes I will call the police. He drew breath. And I don't care what your lawyer says. Silence. Then Wednesday said, your car needs a new tire. Everyone looked at her. The one at the back left, she said. It's flat. I noticed when we walked past. Vernon stared at her. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing, Wednesday said. I just noticed it. She held his gaze. Vernon looked at her and felt, obscurely and without knowing why, that this had been a warning of some kind. He felt that somehow the small girl in the black dress had just demonstrated something, and he hadn't understood the demonstration, which was the worst kind. His face went through several more colors. But he sat back down. Broadmoor will file the paperwork this week, Gomez said, as though the preceding 30 seconds hadn't happened. In the meantime, we'd like to take Harry with us today. He can take anything he wants from his room. His room, Vernon said, with a particular sneer. The cupboard, Harry said quietly. There's a book and a blanket. That's all. Another silence, worse than the first. Morticia looked at the Dursleys with an expression that was entirely composed and somehow worse for it. I want to be clear about something, she said, in her low, perfectly modulated voice. I am not angry with you. Anger is for people I consider worth the energy. She paused. But if anything happens to Harry's transition, if there are legal complications, if your cooperation becomes difficult, if anything surfaces that requires us to revisit this house, I want you to understand that I will handle it personally. Another pause. I find that very few problems survive my personal attention. She said it with such perfect serenity that it took a moment to understand what she'd said. Vernon opened his mouth. Closed it. His mustache moved independently. Petunia said nothing. She was looking at her hands. Harry went to the cupboard. He came back with a book, Dudley's old picture book, the spine cracked, some of the pages torn, and a thin grey blanket. He stood in the hall holding them and looked at the house he'd lived in for 6 years, and it looked back at him with all the warmth of a place that had never known him. He turned to Wednesday. Okay, he said. I'm ready. They left. Gomez held the door for everyone with the flourish of a man who'd won something. Which he had. 3 weeks later, Harry Potter stood in the drive of the Addams house and tried to understand what he was looking at. The house was, enormous was the wrong word, though it was enormous. Forbidding was closer, though it wasn't that either, because it didn't feel unwelcoming so much as it felt specific. It felt like a place that had opinions about who it wanted inside it and was fairly confident about those opinions. It was all dark angles and towers and windows that were too tall and a roofline that seemed to go in more directions than a roofline should geometrically go. The gardens were the kind of beautiful that involved a lot of things that were dead, or that appeared dead but were actually just sleeping very deeply. A stone wall ran the perimeter, and atop it at intervals sat stone gargoyles that Harry kept thinking moved when he wasn't looking directly at them. It's called the Addams house, Wednesday said beside him. It's been in the family for 7 generations. The east wing flooded in 1887 and we never drained it. It has 11 fireplaces and 9 of them work. 2 of them work in ways we don't entirely understand. Right, Harry said. He adjusted the borrowed jacket he was wearing. Gomez had bought him clothes, a bewildering and enormous quantity of them, mostly because Gomez had pointed at things in shops and said that looks like Harry with the confidence of someone who'd known Harry for 30 years instead of 3 weeks. Most of it was dark, or had interesting details, or had clearly been chosen by someone for whom fashion was a form of self-expression rather than a social contract. Harry loved every piece of it with a ferocity that surprised him. The East Wing, he said. Flooded. Grandmere flooded it, Wednesday said. She was going through a period. Right. The front door opened, which Harry had not experienced before. The door at the Dursley house had always been opened by a person. This door opened on its own, and it didn't make the sound of a door with a good hinge. It made the sound of a door that had been opening since before you were born and found your presence acceptable but not especially significant. Inside, Lurch was waiting. Lurch was very tall and very grey and moved with the slow inevitable quality of geological time. He looked at Harry with sunken eyes and made a sound. He says welcome, Wednesday translated. Thank you, Harry said. Lurch made another sound, marginally different. He says your room is ready, Wednesday said. Does he not speak? He speaks, Wednesday said. You'll learn to understand him. She walked past Lurch into the entrance hall and Harry followed, and Lurch closed the door behind them with a boom that settled into the house and was absorbed by it, and the sound the door made was not frightening, somehow. It was the sound of something closing properly. The entrance hall had a staircase that went up in directions Harry's eyes couldn't quite follow on first look. There was a chandelier made of bones, real ones, Wednesday confirmed when he asked, though she was vague about the species, and portraits on the walls that watched him with interest. Not the warm, welcoming interest of portraits in normal houses. The speculative, deeply personal interest of people who were deciding what they thought about you. They'll introduce themselves eventually, Wednesday said, not looking up at them. Don't rush them. Then Gomez appeared at the top of the stairs and came down them at a speed that suggested he'd forgotten the stairs existed and was mostly using them as a formality. Harry. You're here. Come in, he reached the bottom and clapped Harry on the shoulders with both hands, beaming. We've had your room done. The south-facing one, with the window seat, Wednesday chose it. She has opinions about windows. Pugsley wanted to show you the basement but I told him to wait until you've seen the rest of the house first. Lurch, is the dining room ready? We're eating early, I told Cook. Ah, wonderful. He produced a cigar from nowhere. Come. There's someone who wants to meet you. The someone was in the sitting room, which was a room that felt lived in the way old libraries felt lived in, deeply, specifically, as though the furniture had learned to fit its occupants and not the other way around. There were bookshelves that covered every wall. There was a harpsichord in the corner. There was a chessboard set up on a table by the window with a game in progress that looked to have been ongoing for some weeks. In the best chair, an elderly woman sat with the absolute self-possession of someone who had never in her life been uncomfortable anywhere. She was small and dark-eyed and wore black with the air of someone who'd decided on black before she could walk and had never revisited the question. She looked at Harry over a pair of glasses and said, in a voice like good gravel, "So you're the boy?" "Yes," Harry said. "I think so." Her mouth twitched. "You think so?" "I mean, yes. I'm Harry." "Grandmama," Wednesday said, coming to stand beside the chair. "Wednesday." The woman didn't look away from Harry. "He's undersized." "He was underfed," Wednesday said. "We'll fix that." She extended a hand to Harry. "Not for shaking. For inspection." Harry looked at it for a moment, then shook it anyway, and Grandmama made a sound that might have been approval. "Sit down. I'm told you have magic." Harry sat on the sofa across from her, very straight. "I think so." "You think so again," she said. "I know so," Harry corrected. "Better." She folded her hands in her lap. "And what does your magic feel like?" He thought about it properly, because she seemed like someone who'd notice if you didn't. "Like pressure," he said. "Like when you fill a glass too full and the water goes right to the edge but doesn't spill over yet. When I'm very angry or very frightened it spills. Things break. Or change." He paused. "Once a bird landed on my hand in the garden and I felt it, the magic, and the bird didn't fly away. It just sat there. Until I told it to go." Grandmama regarded him for a long moment. Untrained but substantial, she said. Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday said. You were right. Wednesday said nothing, but something shifted in her expression that Harry was beginning to recognize as her version of a smile. What was she right about? Harry asked. That you're interesting, Grandmama said, without softening it. I'll teach you some basic theory. Wednesday can teach you the practical. She's been practicing since she was 4. She studied him with her old, precise eyes. You're not afraid of this house? No, Harry said. Why not? He looked around the room, the bones on the shelves, the portrait of an ancestor who appeared to have been executed for something, the way the light came through the stained glass over the door and turned the floor purple and green. Because it feels like everyone here is what they actually are, he said slowly. At the Dursleys everything was, covered over. Neat. But wrong underneath. Here it's, he searched for the word. Honest. Grandmama looked at him for another long moment. Acceptable, she said, which Harry was beginning to understand was high praise. The first month was an education in multiple senses. Harry had a room, a real room, with a window seat that looked out over the garden, and walls that were slightly older than they should be and sometimes creaked in the night in a way that felt communicative rather than alarming. He had bookshelves, and Gomez had stocked them with both ordinary children's books and several that were decidedly not, and had made no distinction between the categories, which Harry found more useful than any organization system might have been. He had, for the first time, a door that locked from the inside. He locked it the first night and lay in the dark listening to the particular silence of a very large house in the small hours, the way the portraits murmured to each other in distant rooms, the way lurch moved through the lower floors like a slow tide, the way something in the east wing occasionally made a sound that wasn't frightening if you'd been told about the flooding, and he felt the full, strange weight of what being safe felt like. It was heavier than he'd expected. Like taking off a coat you'd been wearing so long you'd forgotten it was a coat. Grandmama taught him theory. She had a study that smelled of old parchment and something sharp and green, and she made him sit at the desk opposite her and read sections of books that were sometimes in languages he didn't know, and then ask him questions about what he'd read, and then argue with his answers, and then tell him he was wrong in a way that somehow conveyed she found it useful that he was wrong. Magic is not a tool, she told him, on the 3rd day. People who treat it as a tool end up with a broken hand. It's a relationship. With what? Harry asked. With yourself, she said. With the world. With the thing that connects them. She turned a page of whatever she was reading with the authority of someone conducting a dismissal. Now read chapter 4 and come back when you've understood it. He came back an hour later and told her what he'd understood, and she said he'd missed the 3rd implication, which was the most important one, and sent him back. He came back again and she said better, and then asked him a question that had nothing to do with what he'd read and everything to do with how he thought. He liked it. More than he expected to, which was saying something because he'd always liked reading, even the torn picture book in the cupboard. Wednesday, meanwhile, taught him other things. She had a specific pedagogy, which was, here is a thing, do it, we'll figure out why it works afterward. This was exactly opposite to Grandmama's approach and exactly what Harry needed to sit alongside it. They went to the part of the garden that Morticia called the gray section, not gray in color, but gray in taxonomy, the plants that lived between categories, neither decorative nor edible nor entirely safe. Wednesday knew them all by name. Don't touch the one on the left, she said, on his first tour. It bites. Not metaphorically. What do I do if it bites me? Let it finish. It only takes a second. If you pull away it keeps the peace. She indicated another plant, which had a faint luminescence that seemed to exist regardless of the available light. This one is useful for focus. Hold a leaf and try to do something small with your magic. Like what? Anything. Move a pebble. Make the air warmer. Make that snail go faster. Harry picked up a leaf, held it, and looked at the snail. He thought about the pressure behind his sternum that was his magic's resting state, and instead of waiting for it to spill he tried, carefully, to direct it. Like turning a tap instead of letting a pipe burst. The snail went faster. Noticeably, absurdly, impressively faster. Wednesday watched. Again, she said. But smaller. The snail doesn't need to break the land speed record. It's hard to do it small, he said. Everything's hard to do small at first, she said. That's why we practice. They practiced. Every afternoon. Harry learned to do things smaller and then larger and then with specific intent rather than general feeling. He learned that his magic was responsive to his emotional state the way a sail was responsive to wind. You couldn't change the wind, but you could learn to work with it or against it or around it. Wednesday's magic was different from his. Quieter, colder, more precise. His ran warm and reactive. Hers ran still and deliberate. Together, practicing beside each other in the grey garden while Morticia's black roses grew in the beds above them and the gargoyles watched from the walls, they figured out the spaces where their magics were complementary, how his warmth and her precision could be layers rather than alternatives. Grandmama watched this once, from the study window, and said nothing. But she stopped asking Harry to come back for a third read of Chapter 4 after that. Pugsley featured in Harry's life in the specific way of a younger sibling who'd decided to adopt you without asking, appearing suddenly in the lab. Pugsley had a lab, it was in the basement, the adults had established certain rules about what he could attempt without supervision, and Pugsley regarded these rules as suggestions, to show Harry something that had gone wrong interestingly, or asking him to hold one end of something that Harry should probably not have held one end of, or sitting beside him at dinner and talking about his experiments with the complete ease of a child who'd never once been told that his interests were strange. He was 6, like Harry and Wednesday, and he had round eyes and an innocent face that was genuinely misleading. He'd set something on fire with his mind at age 4, as Wednesday had mentioned, and had since developed a more general talent for destruction that was, in its own way, as impressive as Wednesday's precision or Harry's emotional resonance. Pugsley broke things with the purity of purpose. He never broke anything accidentally. He broke things because he'd considered whether the breaking would be interesting and concluded it would. Harry liked him. He hadn't expected to, particularly, he'd never had anyone who acted like a sibling, so he wasn't sure what the category felt like, but Pugsley was straightforward in a way that Harry found restful after years of navigating what the Dursleys did and didn't want from him. What Pugsley wanted was always plainly stated and mostly involved explosions. And then there were the animals. The Addams house had animals in the way that other houses had furniture, present, various, considered essential. There was a lion in the garden that had a complicated relationship with the stone wall. There were several spiders of a size that put them firmly in the category of deliberate pets rather than household occurrence. There was a carnivorous plant called Lily in the conservatory that Morticia fed twice a week and spoke to in French. There was a raven that lived on the landing above the 3rd floor who appeared to understand English and occasionally offered opinions. And there was Aristotle, the family's large and ancient tortoise, who lived in the East Garden and moved with the certainty of something that had survived enough centuries to know that urgency was mostly an illusion. Harry found him one morning at the edge of the grey garden, and sat beside him, and told him things he hadn't told anyone yet, about the cupboard, about the green light in his dreams, about the way he sometimes woke up and couldn't remember for a moment that he wasn't there anymore. Aristotle listened. Then moved, with great deliberation, until his shell was touching Harry's knee. Harry sat with him for an hour. Wednesday found him there eventually. She sat on the other side of Aristotle and didn't ask what they'd been talking about, because she was Wednesday, and she understood that some conversations were complete in themselves. "Do you miss anything about before?" she asked, after a while. "No," Harry said. Then, more honestly, the garden. When they let me in the garden. I liked it. He looked at the grey garden around them. "But this is better." "Obviously," she said. He smiled. The expression was getting more comfortable on his face, fitting more naturally. "What about you? Is it strange, having me here?" She considered the question with the seriousness she gave all questions. It was strange for the first week, she said. Then it stopped being strange and became ordinary, which I find more interesting than strange because it means something real has changed rather than just something that will change back. That makes sense, Harry said, though it was a slightly unusual way to put it. The house likes you, she said. The portraits have been talking about you. The one above the second landing told grandmother you have the look of a Blackwood, which is a family they fought beside in 1693. She said it was possible. She paused. I think she was pleased. I'm not a Blackwood, Harry said. No, Wednesday said. But houses and portraits don't work strictly by bloodline. They work by character. She looked at him sideways, briefly, with the directness that was entirely her own. You belong here, Harry. In the factual sense, I mean. Not the sentimental one. Harry looked at the grey garden, at the biting plant, at Aristotle's ancient shell, at the black roses above them, at the stone wall with its patient gargoyles, at the towers of the house rising behind everything with their too many angles and their honest dark presence. I know, he said. And he did. It was the 6th week when the first letter came. Not the Hogwarts letter, that was years away. This letter came at night, delivered by something that wasn't an owl and wasn't a bird in any conventional sense. It was gone before anyone got a proper look at it, leaving only a sealed envelope on the windowsill of the study with a wax seal that Wednesday looked at for a long moment before bringing it to Gomez. The seal was an eye, partially closed, set inside a half-circle. Gomez held the envelope and looked at it with an expression that was, for the first time since Harry had known him, unreadable. What is it? Harry asked. Someone knows you're here, Gomez said. Someone who? Wednesday asked. Gomez didn't answer immediately. He turned the envelope over. The back was blank. He broke the seal and read the single sheet inside, and his expression didn't change, which was itself an expression. His name is Albus Dumbledore, Gomez said. He set the letter on the desk. He describes himself as Harry's magical guardian. He says he's aware of the change in Harry's living situation. He looked up. He requests a conversation. The room was quiet. How did he know? Harry asked. He placed enchantments on the Dursley house when he left you there, Wednesday said, with a certainty that made Gomez look at her. We don't know that, Gomez said. It's the logical inference, Wednesday said. If someone left a child there deliberately, and it was deliberate, children don't appear in cupboards under stairs by accident, they would want to know if something changed. The enchantments would notify him. She looked at Harry. He left you there on purpose. Harry sat with that. Why? The letter doesn't say, Gomez said. What does the letter say? Wednesday asked. Gomez picked it up again. I have been aware of Harry's extraordinary destiny since before his birth. The arrangements for his upbringing, though imperfect, were made with the full weight of his safety in mind. I would very much appreciate the opportunity to explain the nature of those arrangements to his current guardians, and to discuss the path forward. He set it down. The future I have worked toward for many years depends in some part on Harry Potter, and I believe it is in everyone's interests that we meet. Silence again. He didn't ask how Harry was, Wednesday said. Gomez looked at her. No. He didn't express concern for Harry's welfare. He said the arrangements were made with his safety in mind, not his happiness. He referred to Harry's destiny and to a future he has planned. Wednesday's voice was perfectly level. He treats Harry as a component. He does, Gomez said. He was watching Wednesday with an expression that was partly parental admiration and partly something more serious. We should meet him, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. He was sitting very straight on the settee, his green eyes steady. I want to know what he knows. About my parents. About why I was at the Dursleys. He paused. And I want him to see that I'm not where he put me anymore. Gomez looked at his son and then at this boy who had come to them 6 weeks ago with a torn picture book and a gray blanket, and smiled. Not the wide, delighted smile he used for fun. The other one, the warm specific one. That, he said, is the correct answer. He picked up a pen and began writing a reply. Wednesday moved to sit beside Harry on the settee. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, which was Wednesday's way of saying everything that didn't need to be said aloud. Outside, the Addams house creaked around them in the comfortable way of a building that was perfectly satisfied with its inhabitants, and the gargoyles on the wall turned their stone heads a few degrees toward the gate, watching the dark lane beyond it with the patient attention of things that have been waiting a long time and are good at it. Whatever was coming, it would come through that gate. And it would find that the boy who was supposed to be in the cupboard was sitting in a warm room with people who considered him worth fighting for, learning who he was before anyone else got the chance to decide it for him. Chapter 3, The Letters. The reply Gomez sent to Albus Dumbledore was 3 paragraphs long, written in his particular extravagant hand on black-bordered Addams family stationery, and it said yes to the meeting, named a date, and contained in its final line something that Wednesday had suggested and Gomez had written with great relish. We look forward to discussing Harry's future. He will be present, as we believe children should be present for conversations about their own lives. The messenger, still unidentified, dawn before morning, took it from the windowsill. 3 days later Albus Dumbledore arrived at the gate of the Addams house at precisely 2 in the afternoon, which told you something about him right away. He was tall, and old, and wore robes of deep blue scattered with small silver stars, which on most people would have looked absurd but on him looked like he'd decided what kind of person he was going to be a long time ago and had dressed accordingly ever since. He had a long white beard and half-moon spectacles and eyes that were the particular blue of winter sky, pale, clear, and with an alertness behind them that was doing several things simultaneously. He stood at the gate and looked at the house, and the house looked back. Wednesday watched him from the upstairs window. She had been watching since the end of the lane, when he'd first appeared, because she liked to see how people reacted to things before they knew they were being observed. Most people's real opinions lived in the first 2 seconds before they composed themselves. Dumbledore looked at the Addams house for those 2 seconds with an expression that was, not exactly worried. More like a man recalibrating a plan. A small adjustment, the kind you made when something was not what you expected but you'd had enough experience to not be derailed by the unexpected. Then the gate opened, which it did on its own for people the house found acceptable and did not do for people it didn't, and Dumbledore walked through with the measured pace of someone who was choosing their pace deliberately. Wednesday went downstairs. Gomez met him at the door with full Addams hospitality, which meant genuine warmth, a handshake of some force, an immediate offer of something to eat and drink, and being ushered into the sitting room before he'd finished his first sentence. Morticia appeared from the conservatory still holding her pruning shears, which she set on the hallway table with a small click. She extended her hand to Dumbledore and he took it, and she said, "Professor Dumbledore. Please sit down." He sat. He looked around the room, taking in the bookshelves, the bone chandelier visible through the doorway, the portraits, the chessboard. His expression remained pleasantly composed. "What a remarkable home," he said, and appeared to mean it. "Thank you," Gomez said, sitting across from him, crossing one leg over the other and producing a cigar with the ease of a man reaching for a pen. "It's been in the family. You understand." "Indeed." Dumbledore's eyes found Harry, who was sitting in the chair by the window that he'd quietly claimed as his over the past weeks. Harry looked back at him. Dumbledore studied him with those pale clear eyes for a moment that was slightly too long to be casual. "Harry," he said. "You look well." "I am well," Harry said. "I'm very glad to hear it." Dumbledore smiled. It was a good smile, warm and genuine, and Harry noticed it and also noticed that it was doing work, that it was meant to establish something. Wednesday sat on the arm of Harry's chair. She'd chosen the position deliberately. Dumbledore's eyes moved to her briefly, with an alertness that he kept very well contained, then back to Gomez. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," he said. And I appreciate your intervention, if I can call it that, on Harry's behalf. The Dursley household was not, I acknowledge, an ideal environment. It was a cupboard, Gomez said pleasantly. Yes. Dumbledore's expression didn't flicker. It was. I want to be honest with you, Mr. and Mrs. Addams. I knew the conditions were imperfect. I made a calculation, one I believed was necessary, that Harry needed to be in that specific house, with those specific people, regardless of comfort. Why? Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at him again, and this time something shifted in his expression, a faint surprise, quickly managed. He'd expected, Harry thought, to talk about Harry rather than to Harry. Because of something your mother did, Dumbledore said. When she died. She died protecting you, Harry, and that love created a protection, an ancient magical shield. As long as you lived with blood family, with someone who shared her blood, that protection held. Kept you safe from a particular threat. Voldemort, Wednesday said. The name landed in the room. Dumbledore looked at her with the specific attention of someone reassessing something. Yes, he said, carefully. Though most people prefer not to, say his name, Wednesday said. Yes. We've read about that habit. It seems counterproductive. She turned the name over like a stone. Voldemort. What is the actual threat? Is he dead? Not, precisely, Dumbledore said. He had the look of a man conducting a meeting that had departed significantly from his agenda. He is diminished. Without a body. But not gone, and capable of return. The protection kept Harry safe while he remained, in a cupboard, Gomez said, again pleasantly. He was leaning back in his chair, entirely relaxed, and looked for all the world like a man having a delightful conversation. This was, Wednesday knew, one of his most effective modes. People confused warmth with lack of attention. I understand the theory, Professor. Blood magic, ancient protections, the mechanics of sacrificial love. It's elegant work, genuinely. He took a pull on his cigar. My concern is the implementation. The protection required Petunia's house. It did not, as I understand such magic, require a cupboard, malnourishment, or systematic unkindness. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It didn't. And yet. He seemed to make a decision. He looked at his hands, briefly, and then back up, and for just a moment something genuine moved through his expression, not guilt, quite, but the closest thing to it that a man who'd convinced himself he was necessary would allow himself. I placed Harry with the Dursleys and I checked on the enchantments and I did not check on Harry. That is a true thing and I will not pretend otherwise. Harry looked at him. He looked at this old man in his star-scattered robes who had the kind of gravity that made rooms feel smaller, who had, Harry understood now, understood it as a fact rather than a concept, left him in a cupboard for 6 years because the plan required it. He looked at him and waited to feel something large. Rage, maybe. Or grief. What he felt instead was something quieter and more structural. Like watching a wall and seeing the crack in it for what it was. You were going to leave me there, Harry said. Until I was 11. Until Hogwarts, yes, Dumbledore said. At which point you'd have told me about magic and about Voldemort and about my parents, Harry said. And I'd have been grateful. Because I wouldn't have known anything before, so I'd have thought you were giving me something. He paused. But you'd have just been giving me back what was already mine. Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, Pugsley dropped something heavy. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, this 6-year-old boy who had the particular quality of someone who'd learned to see clearly very young and practiced it until the habit was permanent, and something in his expression was not what it had been when he walked through the gate. You're quite right, he said quietly. I know, Harry said. Wednesday, on the arm of the chair, said nothing. But her hand, which had been resting on the chair back, moved slightly closer to Harry's shoulder. Gomez uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. "Here is what I'd like to discuss," he said. "The protection. You said it requires blood family. We've spoken to a number of specialists." He waved the cigar vaguely, indicating an entire research process that had apparently happened off-screen with great efficiency, because Addams moved on problems with the force of a man who didn't accept the concept of obstacles, and the consensus is interesting. The protection requires that Harry's mother's blood family acknowledge him as family. Dumbledore stilled. That is a narrow and somewhat contested interpretation. Broadmoor is not a contested lawyer, Gomez said. He's the best magical legal mind in the country. And he says, he produced a document from his jacket pocket with the ease of a stage magician, that the original enchantment is keyed to acknowledgement of blood relation, not to a specific address. Petunia acknowledges Harry as her nephew. She does so in the legal documents she signed when we took guardianship. He smiled. The protection travels with the acknowledgement, not with the house. Dumbledore looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time. "You had this researched before I arrived," he said. "Of course," Gomez said warmly. "I'm a very prepared man." Broadmoor filed the full guardianship papers 4 days ago, Morticia said from the doorway, where she had appeared at some point without anyone quite registering it. She leaned against the frame with her arms folded, unhurried and absolute. "It's done, Professor. Harry lives here now. The question before us is what kind of relationship we have going forward, a cooperative one, or a complicated one." Dumbledore looked at Morticia. She looked back. It was an interesting exchange, two very different kinds of certainty measuring each other. "Cooperative," he said. "Unquestionably." He returned his attention to the room at large, and there was something different in the quality of it now. He was no longer running a meeting he'd planned. He was in a meeting that had gone its own way and he was choosing how to engage with that honestly. "I have plans. Long-standing ones. I would be dishonest if I claimed they weren't disrupted by this. Harry's history, his self-perception, the groundwork, if I can use the word without it sounding as calculated as it was, it sounds exactly as calculated as it was," Wednesday said. Dumbledore looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You're Wednesday Addams." "I am. I've heard the name. Your family has a significant presence in certain, adjacent communities to the wizarding world." He studied her with those pale, multitasking eyes. "You found Harry." "Yes." "And you've been teaching him." "Yes." "What have you taught him?" Wednesday met his gaze without any shift in her expression. "To think for himself," she said. "Mostly." Another silence. Then Dumbledore did something unexpected, he laughed. Not a performance laugh, not a diplomatic one. A genuine, briefly unguarded laugh that belonged to someone who'd been surprised into it. "I see," he said. He folded his hands. "I think, perhaps, we should talk about Hogwarts." "We were wondering when you'd get there," Gomez said. "It's 4 years away," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore agreed. "But preparation matters." And, he looked at Harry directly, and whatever calculation was normally operating behind his eyes was quieter for a moment. "I would like you to know some things before then. About your parents. About what happened." A pause. "If you'd like to hear it." Harry had been waiting for this. He'd felt it coming since Dumbledore walked through the gate, the way you felt weather changing. He looked at Dumbledore and then briefly at Wednesday, who gave him nothing because she understood that this was his to take or not. "Tell me," Harry said. So Dumbledore told him. He told him about Voldemort's rise, about the war, about James and Lily Potter. He was honest, Harry thought, in the way that very intelligent people were honest, selectively, with an awareness of what each truth would do, but not lying, exactly. He told Harry about the night in Godric's Hollow, about the green light, about the curse that had rebounded. Harry sat through all of it with the stillness he'd been practicing and felt the green light from his dreams become a fact rather than a ghost. When Dumbledore finished, the room was quiet for a moment. My parents were in hiding, Harry said. From Voldemort. Yes. Someone told him where they were. Dumbledore's expression showed, for just a moment, the particular weight of old grief. Yes. Who? A man named Peter Pettigrew. A friend of your father's who was working for Voldemort. Where is he now? Dead, Dumbledore said. Or so we believed. He was killed, or appeared to be killed, by another of your father's friends, Sirius Black, the night after your parents died. Appeared to be, Wednesday said. Dumbledore looked at her. The pause was one beat too long. He was found to be the culprit. Sirius Black killed 12 Muggles and left almost nothing. Pettigrew was, you said appeared to be killed, Wednesday said. She said it without emphasis, just returning the phrasing. A figure of speech, Dumbledore said. It wasn't a figure of speech, Wednesday said. It was a precise construction. You said, or so we believed, and, appeared to be killed. Those are both hedges. She tilted her head. What aren't you certain about? Dumbledore looked at this 6-year-old girl with something that was very nearly, in the privacy of his own expression, respect. You're very precise, he said. Yes, Wednesday said. Pettigrew was killed, Dumbledore said. Sirius Black killed him. He said it more firmly. Sirius is in Azkaban. Wednesday let it go. But Harry could see that she hadn't let it go in the part of her that didn't let things go. The afternoon moved on. Dumbledore stayed for tea, which Morticia served with the grace of someone for whom hospitality was a form of power rather than obligation. He and Gomez discussed magical law, wardship, the Hogwarts situation, and several other things with the engaged energy of two men who were, in very different ways, accustomed to being the most interesting person in a room and finding the novelty refreshing. When he left, the gate closed behind him, and Wednesday and Harry stood at the upstairs window and watched him walk back down the lane. What do you think? Harry asked. I think he believes he's doing right, Wednesday said. Genuinely. He's not lying when he talks about protecting you. He's telling the truth about the protection and about Voldemort and about the war. She watched until he turned the corner and disappeared. But he has a plan that he's had for years, and you're in it, and he's not going to stop having it just because you're not in the cupboard anymore. He's adapting it. To include the Addams family. To work around us, she said. There's a difference. Harry leaned his forehead against the cold glass. He didn't ask if I was okay, he said. Even when he was being honest. He talked about the protection and the war and Hogwarts and my parents. He didn't ask how I was. No, Wednesday said. He didn't. They stood there for a moment in the gray afternoon light. There's something else, Wednesday said. About Sirius Black. The hedge, Harry said. He didn't answer when I pushed. He restated. People who are certain don't restate, they clarify. She turned from the window. If Black is in Azkaban for killing Pettigrew, and Pettigrew is not certainly dead, then either Black didn't do what they say, or Pettigrew is alive somewhere, or both. She paused. And if Black is innocent and they've known for 5 years, he'd still be in prison, Harry said. His voice was quiet and strange. He was my parents' friend. He might be your godfather, Wednesday said. I looked at the birth records Broadmoor pulled. There's a magical guardianship registered for you, the legal guardian in the event of your parents' deaths. The name was sealed. She met his eyes. Sealed records are sealed for a reason. Harry stared at her. You looked into that. Of course I did, she said, as though this were self-evident. Someone left you in a cupboard. It seemed worth understanding the entire picture. He looked at her for a long moment. Wednesday Addams, who had crouched on the front path of number 4 Privet Drive because a curtain moved, and had not stopped moving since. What do we do? He asked. Nothing yet, she said. We're 6. We store it. She walked away from the window. Grandmama has left chapter 12 for you. She said you'd want it after today. He turned from the window. What's chapter 12? Enchantments of sacrifice and substitution, Wednesday said. The mechanics of what your mother did. She glanced back at him over her shoulder. She thought you might want to understand it properly. Rather than just being told it was love and having that be the whole answer. Harry took a breath. Yeah, he said. I do. He followed her downstairs. The years between 6 and 11 were not, by any reasonable accounting, slow. Harry learned magic the way you learn a language when you were immersed in it, not by conjugating verbs in isolation but by needing to communicate, and communicating, and making mistakes that were instructive, and occasionally setting something on fire by accident, and then learning not to. By 8 he could sustain controlled magic for several minutes without emotional trigger. By 9 he could do it deliberately, intentionally, in specific shapes. By 10, he was doing things that Grandmama described as advanced by any standard, which from Grandmama was the equivalent of anyone else standing and applauding. Wednesday progressed in parallel, and their magic developed in a complementary way that things develop when they grow alongside each other, Harry's warm and responsive and enormous, Wednesday's cold and architectural and exact. They argued about theory constantly, which Grandmama said was the most useful form of study. They read Dumbledore's letters, which came every few months, with genuine interest and genuine skepticism in equal measure. He was careful, those letters. He didn't push. He offered information freely, about the wizarding world, about Hogwarts, about what Harry might expect. He never mentioned the cupboard again. He never mentioned a plan. But Wednesday kept a file, in the orderly and slightly alarming way she kept everything, every letter, annotated, cross-referenced. What are you looking for? Harry asked her once, watching her add a new letter to the file. Patterns, she said. The thing he wants is in the pattern. Individual letters are curated. Patterns are harder to curate. And? She tapped the file. He mentions the Philosopher's Stone 3 times. Always in passing. Always as if it's just an interesting historical fact. She looked at Harry. Dumbledore doesn't have interesting historical facts. He has operational information that he's choosing to deliver at a specific rate. The Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Immortality. And the elixir of life, Wednesday said. Which is relevant to Voldemort. Who is not dead. Right. He's building towards something at Hogwarts, Wednesday said. He's mentioned it in 4 letters. The implication is that something significant is being protected there, though he doesn't say what or where. She closed the file. He's testing what we pay attention to. Or he's actually just informing us. Wednesday looked at him. Or he's testing us, Harry agreed. Hogwarts letters arrived in the August of Harry's 11th year, and there were 2 of them, which might have been a coincidence except that by now Harry and Wednesday had both developed a thorough personal resistance to coincidence as a concept. They arrived together, both addressed in the same green ink, same heavy parchment, same Hogwarts crest. One to Harry Potter. One to Wednesday Addams. They opened them at the breakfast table. Gomez read over Wednesday's shoulder. Morticia appeared from the kitchen with a cup of tea and read over Harry's. Same letter, Gomez observed. Same wording, Morticia confirmed. Wednesday folded hers back into its envelope. He arranged it, she said. The Addams family owning property in Hogsmeade has put us on the school's radar since Wednesday was born, Morticia said. I always expected a letter. Not at the same time as mine, Harry said. No, Wednesday agreed. That was arranged. She thought about it for a moment. She thought about Dumbledore's letter 6 months ago, which had mentioned, in passing and apparently casually, that Hogwarts was a remarkable place for forming bonds between students with shared unusual circumstances. She thought about his letter the year before, which had mentioned that the school benefited from students who were capable rather than merely talented. She thought about the pattern. "He wants us together," she said. "At Hogwarts. He's built it into the plan, Harry and me both, which means he's accounted for us. He's had 5 years to rethink and he's decided having both of us there is useful rather than disruptive. He's incorporating us," Harry said. "Trying to," Wednesday said. "There's a difference." She picked up her pumpkin juice, which she drank because she found the taste interestingly wrong. "He wants Harry at Hogwarts for reasons connected to the stone and to Voldemort. He wants me there because I'm with Harry and he's decided that's a fixed variable. He's made room for us in the plan." She paused. "That doesn't mean we're in his plan. It means he thinks we are." Harry looked at the letter. His name in green ink. The same letter that had been meant to arrive at Privet Drive to a boy who didn't know anything, who would have been grateful and overwhelmed and entirely available to be shaped. He thought about what that boy would have been like, and felt the shape of an absence. "I want to go," he said. "Hogwarts." "So do I," Wednesday said. "Because of the stone." "Because of the stone, because of the education, because it's a castle full of magic and ghosts and moving staircases." She looked at him levelly. "I'm not going because Dumbledore wants us there. I'm going because I want to." A pause. "The fact that Dumbledore wants us there is a complication, not a deterrent." Harry nodded. "We go," he said. "We go," Wednesday confirmed. "And we don't pretend to be what he expects." Harry folded his letter and put it in his pocket. "He's going to be disappointed in that." Repeatedly, Wednesday said, with a satisfaction that was the closest she usually came to cheerful. Gomez, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused delight of a parent watching their children do something that makes them proud, stood abruptly and said, "Diagon Alley," with the energy of someone announcing an expedition. "When?" Harry asked. "Tomorrow," Gomez said. He was already heading for the study to make calls. "I'll get Broadmoor to arrange the Gringotts access. Harry, your parents had a vault there, you'll want to sort that. Wednesday, I've been meaning to have your wand situation looked at formally for 2 years, Lurch." He raised his voice and the house absorbed it and the distant sound of something very large moving answered it. "We'll need the car ready by 8. "Gomez," Morticia called after him. "Yes, my love. Try not to close any banks this time." "That was one time," Gomez said, disappearing around the corner, and the teller was very understanding once he calmed down. Harry looked at Wednesday. "He closed a bank," Harry said. "He made a withdrawal," Wednesday said. "It was a large one." The teller had opinions. Father had more opinions. She stood from the table. "Come on. If we're going tomorrow I want to look at the Nocturne Alley section of the index before we go. Grandmama has notes." Harry stood. He thought about tomorrow, about Gringotts, about the vault his parents had left him, about the list of school supplies in the letter, about Wednesday in a wand shop, about the two of them walking into the wizarding world that had no idea they were coming. "Wednesday," he said. "What?" "This is going to be interesting." She looked at him with those dark, still eyes, and something in them that was purely, privately, Wednesday. "It always is," she said. She went to find Grandmama's index. Harry followed. Behind them, the house settled around the breakfast table, warm and specific and entirely theirs, and the portraits on the wall watched them go with expressions of something that had no precise word but was in the neighborhood of good. Chapter 4, Diagon Alley. The Addams family's car left at 7:45 because Gomez had said 8 and considered being early a form of enthusiasm. It was the same black touring car that had broken down on Privet Drive 5 years ago, fully restored and running with the authority of a vehicle that had opinions about roads. Lurch drove. Gomez sat in the front because he liked to point out things of interest through the windscreen. Morticia sat in the back with her book. Pugsley had wedged himself against the left window with something in a box that made intermittent sounds. Wednesday sat in the middle with a small black notebook she'd been writing in since before breakfast. Harry sat on her other side watching London appear around them. He'd been to London twice, both times with the Addams family, and it still felt like a place that had more going on in it than was strictly visible. He watched the streets and the people and tried to imagine a hidden layer underneath it, the pubs that were actually entrances, the shops whose windows showed things that didn't exist, the whole second city running below the one he could see. The entrance is a pub, Wednesday said, without looking up from her notebook. The Leaky Cauldron, Harry said. I read about it. Grandmama's notes say the bar staff have been enchanted to be inattentive to unusual customers for approximately 300 years. She turned a page. It also says the alley itself is significantly larger than its physical footprint should allow. Extended space charms on the scale of a whole district. Very old magic. She looked up, finally, at the passing city. I want to see how it's structured. The space charm. How it's held together. Whether it's multiple overlapping small charms or one large anchor. She tapped the notebook. Large anchor spells need a physical object. Something the whole charm is tied to. I want to know what it is. Harry looked at her. Why? Because understanding how something is built tells you how it can be unbuilt, she said. Not that I intend to unbuild it. But knowing is always better than not knowing. Gomez, from the front, said, my daughter, ladies and gentlemen, with immense paternal satisfaction. The Leaky Cauldron appeared on a street in Charing Cross Road between a bookshop and a record shop, and it had the particular quality of something that was there if you knew to look for it and absent if you didn't. Harry could feel the magic on it, the inattention charm, slightly greasy, like trying to look at something in your peripheral vision. He looked directly at it and held it. Inside was dim and smoky and full of people in robes, which was slightly surreal in the middle of a Tuesday in London. The bar had a figure behind it who was very old and completely bald and moving bottles around with the rhythmic preoccupation of someone who'd been doing it long enough that it had become meditative. The bar went quiet when the Addams family walked in. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people being rude. The quiet of people who recognized something significant and were taking a moment. Several people were looking at Harry's forehead. He'd expected this. The scar was visible because his hair never did what he wanted it to do, but expecting it and experiencing it were different things. The weight of those looks had an edge to it, something between recognition and hunger, like being seen as a symbol before being seen as a person. Wednesday noticed. Don't acknowledge it, she said quietly. Not the way they expect. If you smile and wave they'll make a story about you. If you ignore it they'll just make a different story. What do I do instead? Be unremarkable enough that they don't have a story, she said. For now. They crossed the pub without incident. Gomez shook the barman's hand with his usual comprehensive warmth and appeared to know 3 people at the bar, which was statistically impossible but consistent with Gomez. Morticia moved through the room like weather. In the back courtyard, Gomez produced a piece of paper from his pocket and squinted at it. Broadmoor's instructions for the wall. Apparently it's a brick-tapping sequence. 3rd from the left, 2 up from the bin, Wednesday said. She'd read the notes twice, this morning. Gomez looked at the paper. Looked at the wall. Looked at Wednesday. Pocketed the paper and took out his wand. He had one, an old family heirloom that was made of something dark and slightly warm and didn't behave entirely conventionally, and tapped the sequence. The wall opened. Diagon Alley unfolded. Harry had read descriptions. He'd read Grandmama's notes and Wednesday's annotations and Gomez's stories about the one time he'd visited, 40 years ago, for a very particular ingredient that he was vague about the specifics of. None of it had quite prepared him for the reality, which was, alive. That was the word. It felt alive in the way that the Addams house was alive, but outward rather than inward, all motion and light and the particular energy of a place that had been doing something specific for a very long time and had gotten good at it. The buildings pressed close and crooked. Signs hung above doorways with moving illustrations. A cauldron shop to the left had a display of different sizes in its window, and the small ones were rolling around apparently of their own initiative. The robe shop across from it had mannequins that were adjusting their own sleeves. Everything smelled of parchment and something metallic and a sweetness that might have been coming from several buildings over. Pugsley stopped walking and stared. Wednesday took it in with her standard expression, complete, methodical attention, and Harry watched her eyes move from building to building and knew she was cataloguing. He stood beside her and felt his magic respond to the place, warming slightly, like something recognizing something. Gringotts first, Morticia said, appearing between them and directing them gently forward with the specific technique she had for managing everyone's momentum simultaneously. Gringotts was at the end of the alley, and it was the most aggressively authoritative building Harry had ever seen. White stone, tall enough to make other tall buildings feel self-conscious, goblin guards at the front in their red and gold uniforms standing with the particular posture of beings that didn't especially care whether you were impressed or not. Inside was high marble and the sound of many transactions and goblins moving between desks with the efficiency of people for whom time was precisely quantified. The ceiling was vaulted and the light was golden, and the whole place had the feeling of somewhere that had been secure for so long that security had become architectural rather than merely procedural. A goblin at the front desk looked at them over half-moon spectacles that were a different shape from Dumbledore's and somehow conveyed a completely different disposition. "We have two matters," Gomez said, producing documents from his jacket with the ease of someone who could apparently fit an entire filing system in a breast pocket. "The Potter Vault, Harry Potter, here, and a general account review for the Addams family holdings. We spoke with a grim knife last month, there were arrangements." "One moment," the goblin said. It was not an especially long moment. Goblins, Harry was learning, were efficient in the way of people who found inefficiency personally offensive. Within 15 minutes, a goblin named Sharpfang was leading Harry and Gomez to the vaults in the small cart that ran on tracks into the earth, and Wednesday had appropriated a chair near the front desk and was looking at the Gringotts stonework with the specific attention she gave to magical infrastructure. Morticia sat beside her. "Find anything?" "The walls are doing something," Wednesday said. "There's a detection field built into the stone." "Every stone. Not just the enchanted ones." She traced a line in the air that corresponded to a grout line in the marble. "It's a net, not a barrier." "What does it detect?" "Intent," Wednesday said. "I think. Aggressive intent toward the bank itself, probably. It would explain why there are so few visible guards and so little actual fortification on the main floor." She sat back. "Elegant." Morticia looked at the stonework with serene interest. "Do you know how it's done?" "Not yet," Wednesday said. "But I have a theory." Below, in the depths of the bank, Harry was in the cart with Gomez and Sharpfang, and the tunnels went past in the cold rushing dark, and Harry felt the underground air on his face and thought about the fact that he was on his way to a vault that his parents had left him. It was a small thought, wrapped around something large. The vault was number 687. Average by Gringotts standards, Sharpfang indicated, which meant it was full of enough gold to make Harry's eyes go wide when the door swung open, plus a selection of other items, documents sealed in magical cases, a small collection of objects he didn't yet understand, and a shelf of photographs he hadn't known existed. He stood at the doorway and looked at the photos for a long moment. Then he went in and picked one up. A man who moved like Harry and had Harry's exact hair stood with his arm around a woman with red hair and green eyes. They were laughing. The photograph moved, which Harry had read about, but experiencing was different from reading. They moved, they laughed, they turned toward each other with the casual comfort of people who assumed they had time. Harry held the photo and said nothing. Gomez stood at the vault entrance and looked at the ceiling and did not say anything either, which was the most thoughtful thing he could have done. When Harry came back to the cart, he had the photograph in his jacket pocket. He had 3 others, similarly tucked. Gomez didn't ask. He patted Harry once on the shoulder, brief and sure, and Sharpfang drove them back up. At the front desk, Wednesday was arguing with Sharpfang's colleague about the intent detection stonework. Not argumentatively, in the precise, interested way she argued about theory, where the goal was accuracy rather than victory. The field response time must have a threshold, she was saying. A detection net that reacted to every aggressive thought from everyone in the building would be triggering constantly. There must be a calibration. The goblin, whose name badge said Iron Mind, was looking at her with an expression that goblins apparently reserved for humans who weren't idiotic. The threshold is calibrated annually, he said, with the reluctance of someone giving information they were impressed had been asked for. To what baseline? Wednesday asked. Iron Mind paused. That, he said, is proprietary. Of course, Wednesday said. But the existence of an annual calibration means there's a window, between the previous calibration and the new one, where the threshold drifts. The net becomes either more or less sensitive. She looked at him. Which direction does it drift? Iron Mind looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, more sensitive. It accumulates ambient aggressive intent from the street and adjusts upward. So in August, before the New Year calibration, it's at its most sensitive. Wednesday nodded. Thank you. Why do you want to know this? Iron Mind asked, with the tone of a being that had been doing security for a long time and found gaps in its own logic somewhat uncomfortable. I don't intend to rob the bank, Wednesday said patiently. I'm interested in how intent detection architecture works. It seems like the kind of knowledge worth having. Iron Mind looked at her. How old are you? 11, Wednesday said. The goblin made a sound that was hard to classify. Come back when you're 30, he said. We might have a position. Wednesday looked at him with something approaching approval, which for Wednesday was essentially an offer of friendship. Harry arrived at the front desk looking slightly more settled than he'd looked going down, and slightly more weighted, but steady. He looked at Wednesday's conversation partner and raised an eyebrow. She's explaining our security vulnerabilities to herself, Iron Mind said. She does that with everything, Harry said. They hit Madame Malkin's for robes, which was an experience Harry would describe later as being measured by someone who'd made peace with her tape measure having its own opinions. The tape measure ran itself while Madame Malkin spoke and several other students were being fitted simultaneously. One of them immediately made himself known. He was blond, precise-featured, with the particular posture of a boy who'd been told he was important early and often. He was standing on a block 2 down from Harry and looked over with the reflexive assessment of someone sorting other people into categories. Hogwarts, he said, to Harry. Yes, Harry said. First year. Not a question. He looked Harry over. I'm Draco Malfoy. He said the name the way certain people said names that they expected to mean something. He waited. Harry Potter, Harry said. The boy's eyes went to the forehead. Then back to Harry's face, recalibrating. Potter, he said. Of course. I heard you'd, he paused. There were rumors. About where you'd been. I've been here, Harry said. In England. People said you were. Draco stopped again. He was doing the calculation visible on his face, the one that was weighing what he'd heard against what he was seeing, and what he was seeing wasn't matching his expectations, and he wasn't sure how to proceed. Your parents were well regarded, he said, which seemed like a sentence he'd prepared. My father knew your father. Did he? Harry said. Something about the way Harry said it, not hostile, just level, the levelness of someone who wasn't offering anything and wasn't withholding anything, just waiting to see where this went, made Draco look at him differently. Then he looked at Wednesday. Wednesday was being fitted 2 blocks down, and she was not looking at the fitting, she was looking at Draco Malfoy with the full weight of her attention. She wasn't hostile either. She was simply looking at him the way she looked at things she was deciding about. Who's that? Draco said, slightly lower. Wednesday Addams, Harry said. Draco processed this. The Addams name, Harry had learned, was known in certain magical circles, not widely, not with the same currency as the old wizarding families, but specifically, in the way that unusual things were known by people who paid attention to unusual things. It seemed to register. Addams, Draco said, slowly. The family inn, they live in Yorkshire, don't they? The house with the, yes, Harry said. Draco looked at Wednesday again. She was still looking at him with the same expression, calm and complete, and he had the experience that most people had when Wednesday looked at them, the odd certainty that she was not looking at what he was showing her but at what was behind it. He looked away first. Well, he said, which was the sound of someone buying time. I expect I'll see you at Hogwarts. He recovered some of his earlier poise. You'll want to be careful about which families you associate with. Some of them aren't the right sort. Harry looked at him for a moment. He thought about how to answer this and went with honesty, which he'd found was usually the most interesting option. I'll associate with whoever I think is worth associating with, he said. Not really a family's question for me. Draco looked at him. Something moved in his expression, not offended, more like someone who'd met an argument they hadn't had prepared and found it either annoying or interesting and hadn't decided which yet. Wednesday appeared beside Harry. She'd finished her fitting before either of them had noticed. She looked at Draco Malfoy with the same calm. Your left shoulder is higher than your right, she said. Draco blinked. What? Compensation posture, she said. When someone corrects a physical difference young, the body develops a counterbalance. Suggests you had some kind of injury or weakness in childhood on the right side. She tilted her head, fractionally. Your confidence about bloodlines is interesting given that your own body language suggests you've spent significant time feeling inadequate. Draco stared at her. Harry said nothing, but his expression did something it often did in these moments, a small movement at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood. I didn't ask for your assessment, Draco said, stiffly. No, Wednesday agreed. I offered it. There's a difference. She picked up her bag from the chair beside the fitting block. I don't think you're stupid, she said. I think you've been taught to lead with hierarchy because hierarchy is the thing your family is best at. It's not your only option. She looked at him steadily. Think about it. She walked toward the door of the shop without any particular hurry. Draco looked at Harry. Harry shrugged. She does that, he said. He went after her. Outside in the alley, Pugsley was eating something from a bag that appeared to have come from the apothecary rather than a food shop, which nobody commented on. Gomez was examining the window display of a shop that sold magical artifacts with the focused joy of a collector who'd just found a new area of interest. Morticia was reading something she'd bought from a small bookshop 3 doors down. Ollivander's, Wednesday said. They went to Ollivander's. The shop was narrow and dim and full of the specific silence of a place that contained more stored power than its size suggested. The shelves went back further than they should have and were stacked with thin boxes in gray and faded purple and brown, and the whole place smelled of sawdust and something else, something alive. Mr. Ollivander appeared from between shelves without particular announcement. He was old in a way that was hard to quantify, not decrepit, just very, very present, with silver eyes that reflected too much light and gave the impression of someone looking at more of you than was strictly the surface. He looked at Harry immediately, before Harry had done anything. Harry Potter, he said. I wondered when. He moved around the counter. I remember every wand I've ever sold. Every one. His eyes moved to Harry's forehead with the assessing quality of a craftsman looking at a piece of work. Your father, holly and mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Your mother, willow, 10 1/4, swishy. He paused. And the wand that gave you that scar, you, 13 1/2 inches. You sold Voldemort his wand, Harry said. I did, Ollivander said, without apology or pleasure. It's what I do. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. I provide the introduction. He turned and moved along a shelf, fingers running without looking, touching boxes by memory. Complicated case, yours. Let's begin. He tried 11 wands before any of them did anything. The 11th made a shower of blue sparks that Ollivander found promising but insufficient. The 12th made the light fixtures shake and Harry put it down immediately. The 13th, Ollivander went to a shelf he'd been avoiding. Harry noticed, in the way you noticed when someone moved towards something deliberately, was a box that was slightly different from the others. The wood was darker, older. Holly, Ollivander said, holding it out. 11 inches. Phoenix feather core. He paused. The phoenix who gave this feather gave only one other. Mr. Potter, the wand that killed your parents and gave you that scar is this wand's brother. Harry took it. The warmth came immediately, not the sparks and light of the other wands but something deeper, a recognition, like a word you'd always known coming back to you in its original language. The air in the shop moved. Ollivander's silver eyes widened slightly and then settled. Curious, Ollivander said softly. Very curious. Harry lowered the wand. Yes, he said. He held it and it felt right in the specific way that very few things feel right, not comfortable, exactly, but correct. Like a piece of a sentence that had been missing. Wednesday stepped forward. Ollivander looked at her. His expression was different for her, still assessing, still precise, but with a quality that was harder to name. Like recognizing a type he didn't have many data points for. Addams, he said. Wednesday Addams, she confirmed. I knew your great-grandmother, he said. Briefly. Remarkable woman. He studied Wednesday for a moment. And you've been practicing without a wand. Since I was 4, she said. That's unusual, he said. Yes, she agreed. He went to the shelves and spent longer than he had with Harry, moving with a thoughtfulness that was different in quality. He didn't try 11 wands. He tried 3, and 2 of them did nothing, and the third, Blackthorn, Wednesday told Harry afterward, reading the notation on the box. 12 inches. Dragon heartstring. When she held it, the lights didn't shake and there were no sparks. What happened instead was that everything went still. The quiet in the shop, which was already quiet, deepened by a register, like a sound dropping below hearing. Ollivander's silver eyes reflected more light than usual. Precise, he said. Unforgiving. Better suited to those with absolute clarity of intent. He looked at Wednesday over the wand. It'll demand consistency. Good, Wednesday said. She lowered it and her expression was what it always was, composed, complete, but Harry, who had had 5 years to learn the vocabulary of Wednesday's face, saw something in it that wasn't there usually. A warmth, very small, very deep. Like a light seen from outside a window. She felt it too. The recognition. Gomez paid for both wands with an enthusiasm that Ollivander received with the dignity of a man who had survived many enthusiastic customers. Outside, Gomez held both wand boxes simultaneously for a moment, looked between them, and said something in rapid Spanish that Harry couldn't follow. He says your wands are a matched set, Morticia translated. We know that's not technically what a matched set means in wandcraft, Wednesday said. He knows that, Morticia said. He means emotionally. Harry looked at his box. Then at Wednesday's. Then at Wednesday, who was looking at her box with the expression she used when she was filing something away in the permanent section. Nocturne Alley, Wednesday said. Grandmama's list. Is it necessary? Morticia asked, in the mildly interested voice she used when she already knew the answer. She wants powdered bicorn horn, crystallized basilisk scale, and a text that they won't have in flourish and blots, Wednesday said. Yes. Nocturne Alley felt exactly the way the rest of Diagon Alley would feel if the rest of Diagon Alley stopped trying to be cheerful about it. The buildings pressed closer, the light came in at worse angles, and the people moved with the particular economy of those who preferred not to be looked at for too long. Several of them looked at Harry and then looked away quickly, the opposite of the recognition in the main alley. Here the scar was not inspiring. Here it was uncomfortable, a reminder of something that had gone wrong with a plan. Wednesday moved through it without adjusting her pace or her expression, and Harry beside her found that this was the correct approach. She wasn't menacing, she wasn't cautious, she was simply herself in a different street, and this seemed to communicate something that made the crowd part for them. The shop they wanted was at the far end. Borgin and Burke's, which Harry had read about and Grandmama had strong opinions on, she found Mr. Borgin personally irritating but professionally adequate. Inside was full of objects that were beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with being safe. Cases of things that caught the eye and held it slightly too long. Shelves of items whose purpose wasn't immediately apparent and whose purpose, when it became apparent, was often illuminating in uncomfortable ways. Mr. Borgin was a thin man with the quality of a pencil that had been sharpened past its useful length, and he looked at Harry and then at Wednesday with the expression of someone who'd learned to categorize customers quickly. "Help you?" he said, in the voice of someone for whom helping was a technical term. Wednesday produced Grandmama's list. She handed it over. Borgin read it. His expression went through something. "Madam Addams's granddaughter," he said. "Great-granddaughter," Wednesday said. "Right." He looked at the list again with the expression of a man who had opinions about certain items on it but had learned that expressing opinions about items to Addams's was not worth the energy. "I have the bicorn horn. The basilisk scale I'll need to check. The text is in the back." He disappeared. While he was gone, Harry moved along the shelves. He was getting better at the thing Wednesday had taught him, reading the magic on objects the way you read a room when you walked into it, the general quality of the intent bound into them. Some of these objects were old and cold and patient. Some were hungry in a very specific direction. One cabinet had a darkness about it that was different from the others. Not menacing. More like, incomplete. A door opened on one side but not the other. "Wednesday," he said. She came and stood beside him and looked at it. "Vanishing cabinet," she said, after a moment. "It has a twin somewhere. Objects put in one appear in the other." She studied it. "This one's damaged. The connection is broken. Objects put in here currently, don't come out anywhere." She paused. "It's a door to nowhere. Is that dangerous?" "Only if you're in it," she said. She tilted her head. "Or interesting, depending on your perspective." Borgin reappeared with a wrapped package and an old book that looked like it was considering falling apart as a personality choice. He named a price that was significant. Wednesday paid from the funds Gomez had given her without negotiation, because Grandmama had said the text was worth more than the asking price and Grandmama was accurate about these things. Back in the main alley, loaded with books and ingredients and robes and wands and several things Gomez had purchased with the delight of a man with both money and curiosity, they made their way back through the leaky cauldron and out into the unremarkable afternoon of Charing Cross Road, and the Addams car was waiting at the curb where Lurch had parked it in a zone that was definitely not for parking, and nobody had ticketed it, which Harry had stopped questioning. In the car on the way home, Wednesday opened the old text and began reading immediately, before they'd left London. Harry leaned to look and she tilted it so he could see, which she wouldn't have done with most people but did with him. The text was in Latin with marginal annotations in what appeared to be 4 different hands across 4 different centuries. It was about magic that lived in intent rather than in action, the theory that certain spells and enchantments were not about the words or the wand movement but about the internal state of the caster. What you were, rather than what you did. Harry read a paragraph and stopped. "Then read it again." "This is about my mother," he said quietly. "It's about the mechanics behind what she did," Wednesday said. "Yes. How did Grandmama know I'd want this?" Wednesday turned a page. "She knows everything about what's relevant," she said. "It's one of her best qualities." She read for a moment. "Harry." "Yeah. We're going to Hogwarts in 3 weeks." "Yeah. There is a philosopher's stone there," she said, very quietly, just for the 2 of them under the sound of the car. "There is a plan by Dumbledore that we're in the edges of. There is Voldemort, not dead, interested in both the stone and you. She turned another page. And there is something else I haven't said yet. Harry looked at her. What? She kept her eyes on the page for a moment, which was unusual for Wednesday when she was saying something important. Then she looked at him directly. In all of Dumbledore's letters, in all his careful information and his patterns, he's never once mentioned that the connection between your wand and Voldemort's is known to him. She paused. Ollivander told us today. Dumbledore has been in contact with Ollivander for decades. He knew. He's never mentioned it to you. Harry held this. He's keeping the significant things back, Wednesday said. The wand connection. The sealed guardianship record. What Pettigrew really was. She closed the book gently. He gives us information that moves us toward his plan. He withholds information that would move us toward our own decisions. Outside the car, England went past in the late afternoon gold, and London gave way to motorways and motorways to countryside. Harry thought about the wand in his pocket, holly and phoenix feather, brother to the wand that had killed his parents. He thought about the vault and the photographs and the laughing people who'd had no idea, moving in their frozen moment of joy. He thought about Dumbledore, who had known all of it and said almost none of it. When we get to Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes. We don't play by his rules. Wednesday looked at him, and for a moment, brief and specific, she smiled. A real one, small and precise, belonging entirely to her. We never do, she said. The car went on through the gold afternoon and the house was waiting at the end of the road, tall and specific and theirs, and inside it Grandmama was in the study with chapter 18 marked with a red ribbon, and the portraits were watching the lane, and the gargoyles on the wall had turned toward the gate. 3 weeks. Harry put his hand in his jacket pocket and touched the wand through its box and the photograph next to it and felt the weight of both, different and significant in both, in their different ways, his. 3 weeks. Chapter 5, Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Express left from King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and the Addams family arrived at 9:45 because Gomez considered anything less than an hour early to be arriving late, and arriving late was something that happened to other people. Platform 9 3/4 required walking through a barrier between platforms 9 and 10, which Harry did without hesitation because Wednesday had read the mechanics of it 2 days ago and explained it in the way she explained things. Here is a thing, the logic is sound, do it, and Harry had learned over 5 years that Wednesday's logic was worth trusting. He walked through the barrier and the world changed registers, the way it had when Diagon Alley unfolded, and the scarlet steam engine was there with its white clouds and its noise and its crowd, and it was genuinely something. Wednesday came through behind him, carrying her trunk with the calm of someone who hadn't noticed it was heavy. Pugsley came through sideways, trying to manage both his trunk and the box, which was making sounds again. Gomez and Morticia came through last, together, and Gomez stopped on the platform and looked at the train with an expression of absolute delight. Magnificent, he said. I've always wanted to blow up a steam engine. Gomez, Morticia said. Not this one, he said. The platform was full of families, and the Addams family was on the platform, and these two facts were producing a ripple of reactions in the crowd around them that ranged from frank staring to the more disciplined kind where you looked and then looked deliberately away. Several people looked at Harry's forehead with the now familiar hunger recognition combination. Several more looked at Wednesday with the expression people always got, that specific slight recoil, as though they'd reached out to touch something and found it was a different temperature than expected. A woman with violently red hair and 9,000 children was managing a tower of trunks nearby and looked over, and her eyes went to Harry, and her expression did something warm and complicated. Harry Potter, she said, because she was the kind of person who said things rather than simply thinking them. I thought it was you. I'm Molly Weasley, these are my boys. She swept a hand at what turned out to be 6 red-haired people, not 9,000, and this is Ginny, she's not starting yet, she's furious about it. I'm not furious, said the small red-haired girl at her side, in a voice that was entirely furious. We know who Harry Potter is, Mum, said one of the 6, from the middle of the pack. He had a prefect badge and the slightly pained expression of someone who'd spent a long time being the most responsible person in a chaotic situation. "I'm Ron," said the one nearest Harry's age, freckled, with a smear of something on his nose, looking at Harry with the particular combination of someone who was aware he was supposed to be impressed and wasn't sure he wanted to be. "Ron Weasley." Harry said. Ron's eyes moved to Wednesday with the frank assessment of someone who hadn't had time to compose anything diplomatic. "Who's she?" "Wednesday Addams," Wednesday said. Ron looked at her. "Right," he said. "You're the one who, I heard there was a girl who," he stopped. "You've been living with Harry Potter for 5 years." "I live in my family's house," Wednesday said. "Harry lives there too." "But you found him," Ron said. "Before Hogwarts." He stopped himself, with a glance at Harry. "My mum knows everything about everyone," he said by way of explanation. "She's extremely thorough." "I prefer informed," Molly Weasley said, with dignity. Gomez appeared at Harry's shoulder and shook Ron's hand with his standard comprehensive warmth, which Ron received with the expression of someone whose hand had just been shaken by a thunderstorm but who found it oddly pleasant. Then he turned to Molly Weasley and they were immediately in conversation with the ease of two people for whom conversation was a natural state, and Harry took the opportunity to look around the platform. Two of the red-haired boys, twins, he thought, with the matched expressions of people sharing a private frequency, were looking between him and Wednesday with keen interested eyes. "Fred," said one, to Harry. "George," said the other. "Or the other way," they said together. Harry looked at them. They had the quality he'd come to associate with genuinely entertaining people, a brightness that wasn't performed, a readiness that suggested the world was something that happened to them and they decided to happen back. "I'm Harry," he said. Then, because it seemed relevant, "I've been told about Hogwarts pranks." "Good things, we hope," said Fred or George. "Instructive things," Harry said. They looked at each other with an expression that said several things in the private language of twins, and then at Harry with something that was the beginning of respect. "We'll talk," said George or Fred. The train whistle made a sound that was entirely serious about leaving in 15 minutes. Farewells happened. Gomez embraced Harry with the comprehensive force of someone who considered physical affection a full-contact activity, and told him 3 separate things about Hogwarts, 2 pieces of advice, and a story from his own school years that started with a fencing accident and ended with an international incident that Harry couldn't quite follow but enjoyed. Morticia held Harry by the shoulders and looked at him with her calm dark eyes and said simply, "Be who you are," and then kissed his forehead with the same complete assurance she did everything. Wednesday received her farewells with the contained grace of someone who found public emotion interesting in theory and personal in practice, and then Grandmama, who had insisted on coming in the car and was now standing at the barrier in her black traveling coat, crooked a finger at Wednesday and said something very quietly in her ear, and Wednesday's expression shifted by the smallest possible increment. "What did she say?" Harry asked, when they were on the train. "She said don't let anyone make you small," Wednesday said. "And to write." They found a compartment at the end of the corridor. Ron Weasley arrived 2 minutes later and knocked on the glass, which Harry appreciated as a courtesy, and Wednesday let him in, which Ron received with the slight relief of someone who'd braced for a different answer. He sat across from them and looked between them with the frank curiosity of someone who hadn't yet decided how to be diplomatic about things and had concluded he might as well not bother. "So," he said. "You've been doing magic for 5 years." "Practicing," Harry said. "Informally." "And you're," Ron looked at Wednesday, "not actually a witch?" "From a wizarding family, I mean." "Not on the register." "Not on the wizarding register," Wednesday said. "My family has its own traditions." "Right," Ron said. He scratched his nose. "Everyone at home was dead curious about you both." "I mean, Harry Potter living with the Addams family was, Mom read everything she could find and couldn't find much, which she said was unusual." He looked between them. "Are you actually I mean. Are the stories true?" "What stories?" Harry asked. The bat won, Ron said. And the thing with the Yorkshire Post in fourth year. Harry looked at Wednesday. Wednesday looked back at him with an expression of mild acknowledgement. Partially true, Harry said. Which parts? The bat, Wednesday said. The Yorkshire Post situation was more complicated than reported. Ron processed this. Right, he said, and appeared to decide this was sufficient information and moved on with the pragmatic ease of someone who'd grown up in a household that didn't have room for prolonged uncertainty. Do you know what house you want? No preference, Harry said. Gryffindor, Ron said, firmly. All my family's been Gryffindor. Except one, and we don't, he stopped. Just Gryffindor, basically. The house system is an interesting social architecture, Wednesday said. Sorting children at 11 into identity categories and then housing them together for 7 years. The confirmation bias implications are significant. Ron stared at her. It's just houses, he said. Nothing is just anything, Wednesday said. Ron looked at Harry. Harry shrugged slightly, in the way that meant she's right, but I understand why it sounds like a lot. By the time the train was well into the countryside, the compartment had acquired 2 more occupants, a girl with bushy brown hair and an expression of focused organization who'd knocked precisely and introduced herself as Hermione Granger, with the specific energy of someone who'd read everything and was hoping other people had too, and Neville Longbottom, round-faced and slightly anxious, who'd arrived looking for his toad and had been invited to sit down while he looked. Hermione looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who'd read extensively about a person and was now comparing the reading to the reality. You're Harry Potter, she said. And you've been raised outside the wizarding world, almost entirely, but you've been studying magic privately. There's a mention in Unusual Magical Prodigies of the 20th Century, it's not very long, but it references an Addams family connection and describes controlled wandless magic before age 10, which is, she stopped herself. Sorry. I read a lot. So do I, Harry said. Hermione looked like she'd found a 20-pound note in an old coat pocket. This is Wednesday, Harry said. Hermione looked at Wednesday. Wednesday looked at Hermione. It was a different kind of assessment from the one she gave most people, more mutual, more level. 2 people who recognized a specific quality in each other and were deciding what to do about it. You're the one who identified the intent detection architecture at Gringotts, Hermione said. Ironmind mentioned it in an interview with Magical Security Quarterly. He didn't name you, but the description was specific. Wednesday looked at her with slightly more interest than she'd started with. You read Magical Security Quarterly? I read everything, Hermione said, in a tone that was statement and apology and slight pride simultaneously. So do I, Wednesday said. Now it was Hermione who looked like she'd found something in an old coat pocket. They arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dark, which was the correct time to arrive at somewhere like Hogwarts. Hagrid was on the platform calling for first years in a voice that could have been used to address people in the next county, and Harry looked at him, enormous, wide as a small house, with a beard that had its own weather system, and felt something instinctive, something that was not magic exactly but adjacent to it. This person was good. He could feel it the way Wednesday felt infrastructure. The boats across the lake were required, apparently, and this was the first time Harry saw Hogwarts properly, and it was, large wasn't right, vast wasn't right either, those were dimensional words and this was something else. Hogwarts was the kind of building that had accumulated so much history that the history had become structural. He could feel the magic of the place from the water, layered and old and specifically itself, nothing like Diagon Alley, nothing like Gringotts, its own distinct signature. Wednesday, in the boat beside him with Hermione and Neville, put her hand in the water for a moment. Just a moment. Then withdrew it. What is it? Harry asked quietly. The lake is warded, she said. But the wards are permeable. Old enough that things have grown through them. She dried her hand on her robes. There are things in this lake that were here before Hogwarts was. The giant squid, Neville said helpfully. Not just the squid, Wednesday said. Neville looked at the water with an expression that had not been entirely peaceful to begin with and became somewhat less so. The castle swallowed them. Inside was everything Harry had been told and several things he hadn't, starting with the ghosts, who floated through walls with the amiable ease of beings who'd had several centuries to get comfortable with their situation, and including the staircases that moved, which Harry had been told about but which were still something to experience, and the portraits, which spoke, and the ceiling of the great hall, which was the sky. Not a painting of the sky, Hermione told them all as they filed in. A bewitching, the ceiling gone effectively invisible, and Harry looked up and the stars were there and he thought about the Addams house and felt, in a different way, that particular warmth of recognition. He also felt Dumbledore watching him from the staff table. Not suspiciously. Not unkindly. The way you watched something you'd invested in heavily and were assessing in its new context, looking for the place where the plan was still operational. Harry looked back, briefly and directly, and then looked away. The sorting hat was on a stool and it was old and battered, and when it sang its song about the 4 houses Harry listened to the descriptions and thought about what Dumbledore would want. He'd want Harry in Gryffindor. It was where his parents had been, where the narrative required him to be, where the chosen one should go. He thought about what he wanted. Hermione Granger was called first from their group and the hat barely touched her head before shouting Gryffindor, and she sat down with the expression of someone who'd hoped for this and is relieved to have gotten it. Neville Longbottom went to Gryffindor after a slightly longer consideration. Ron Weasley, when called, sat under the hat for approximately 4 seconds before it shouted Gryffindor to the loudest cheer from the red table. Harry Potter. The hall went quiet in the specific way of places where many people stopped talking simultaneously. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat dropped over his eyes and the world went dark, and then the hat spoke in his head with the quality of something that had been sorting humans for 1,000 years and found most of them reasonably legible. "Ah," it said. "Now here's something. You can skip the part where you say I should be in Gryffindor," Harry thought at it. "Can I?" The hat sounded amused. "You have the courage for it. Foolhardy bravery in the face of genuinely dangerous situations, considerable loyalty, moral certainty. Your father was here." "I know. But," said the hat, "you also have this." It touched something in Harry's mind, delicately, a professional touch, pointing at something rather than examining it. A quality that isn't bravery. More foundational than bravery. What is it, do you think? Harry thought. Certainty, he thought. I know what I'm doing and why. That, said the hat, with something that was almost warmth, is the rarest thing I sort. Gryffindors are brave. Ravenclaws are clever. Hufflepuffs are loyal. Slytherins are ambitious. But a child who is simply certain, they go where they're most useful, not where they fit. A pause. Where do you want to be? Where Wednesday is, Harry thought, which was not the most strategic answer but was the honest one. Then, said the hat, we'll wait and see where that is. Gryffindor, it shouted. The red table erupted. Harry took the hat off and passed it back and walked to the Gryffindor table with the composed unhurriedness of someone who'd made their peace with a decision, and sat beside Ron, who was grinning. Wednesday Addams. The hall was quiet again, but differently. Not the recognizing quiet of Harry's name. More like the particular attention you gave to something you couldn't categorize. Wednesday walked to the stool and sat down and the hat settled on her head and the hall watched. 30 seconds passed. Then 40. Harry, who was watching from the Gryffindor table, was aware of a low murmuring starting around the hall. 40 seconds was longer than most people's hat sortings. Hermione, beside him, was timing it on her watch. 53 seconds, she said softly. The hat opened its brim. Slytherin, it said, and there was something in the way it said it that was different from the other sortings, not louder, but more deliberate, like a statement being put on record. The Slytherin table clapped, though with the specific uncertainty of a group that hadn't expected this and was recalibrating. Harry watched Wednesday walk to the Slytherin table and sit down, and she looked across the hall at him, and he looked back, and they both understood simultaneously that Dumbledore, at the staff table, had gone very still. The hat, Harry thought, had sorted them to be in different houses. He didn't know if it had been the hat's idea or something else's. But two things were now separated that Dumbledore would have preferred together, and the whole hall was between them, and they would have to build their position in this school from opposite sides of a room. He thought about what Wednesday had said in the car. He's incorporating us. Trying to. He thought about Dumbledore going still when the hat called Slytherin. He smiled, small and private, at his plate. Good, he thought. The first week of Hogwarts was an education in several things that had nothing to do with the curriculum. Harry had expected the magic, the moving staircases, the paintings, the way certain corridors didn't exist on Tuesdays. He'd expected the classes, the work, the particular calibration involved in going from private study with Grandmama to a classroom of 30 children at various different starting points. He hadn't entirely expected Snape. Professor Severus Snape taught potions in a dungeon classroom that smelled of things that had been chopped and boiled and in several cases were still moving, and he moved through it with the absolute ownership of someone who decided this space was an extension of himself. He was thin and black-robed and had a quality of compressed intensity that Harry recognized as someone who felt a great deal and expressed none of it unless they chose to. He looked at Harry on the first day with eyes that were doing several things at once. Harry looked back. There was a pause of assessment. "Mr. Potter," Snape said. "Our new celebrity." Harry said nothing. "Tell me," Snape's voice was precise and slightly cold, the cold of someone who decided warmth was a liability, "what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "A powerful sleeping potion. Asphodel combined with wormwood produces a compound that inhibits the nervous system's wake response at the base level. The ratio matters, too much asphodel and it becomes irreversible." A beat of silence. "Where," Snape said, carefully, "would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "A goat's stomach," Harry said. "Though the potency varies by the goat's diet. Mountain goats have higher quality bezoars because of the mineral content in highland grass. The stomach of a goat that's eaten lowland vegetation will produce a bezoar that antidotes less effectively." Another silence. Snape's expression was the same but something behind it had shifted. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant," Harry said. "Also called aconite. The name varies by region and context. Monkshood is the common name, wolfsbane is the folkloric one, aconite is the technical designation. It's poisonous in all three names." The class was extremely quiet. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment with those compressed intensity eyes. "That was not incompetent," he said finally, which in Snape's vocabulary was apparently the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Thank you," Harry said. "Don't," Snape said, and turned away, and the class began. He was harder on Harry than on other students. Not unfairly. Harry thought about it and decided it wasn't unfair, but with a specificity that suggested Snape was testing rather than marking. Like he was looking for the ceiling of it and hadn't found it yet. Harry found he didn't mind. Being pushed against the ceiling of what you knew was how you raised the ceiling. Grandmama had operated the same way. He wrote to Wednesday that evening. They'd established a system, not owls, though they both had owls for formal correspondence, but the method Grandmama had shown them, a small piece of specialized parchment that transmitted handwriting in real time, the magical equivalent of writing on one side of a piece of glass while someone read on the other. "Snape," he wrote. "I know," she wrote back, before he'd finished the word. "He was in my year's potions class this afternoon. He didn't bother testing me. He just assigned work and watched. What did you make of him?" "He's grieving," she wrote. "Badly and for a long time. He's turned it into architecture, the coldness, the precision, the controlled cruelty toward students he finds threatening. It's not meanness. It's a structure." A pause, indicated by the parchment staying still. "He looked at you like someone who's been given a problem he hadn't anticipated. My mother? Harry wrote. Almost certainly, Wednesday wrote. He loved her. Past tense. The grief is old but it's still load-bearing. Harry held the parchment and looked at it for a moment. He thought about Snape's eyes when they'd looked at him, doing several things at once, yes, but one of them was pain, the specific pain of recognizing something in someone you weren't prepared to see it in. Don't be cruel to him, Wednesday wrote. I wasn't going to be, Harry wrote. I know, she wrote. I'm reminding you so you remember it when he is. He smiled at the parchment. The Slytherin common room and the Gryffindor common room were, architecturally and socially, about as different as two rooms in the same building could be. Harry got the report from Wednesday in the first week, matter-of-factly. The Slytherin common room was underground, beside the lake, with low ceilings and green light that filtered through the water. Cold. Quiet. Competitive in the particular way of people who'd been told since birth that their bloodline was an achievement. Are they treating you badly? Harry asked, at breakfast, which was the one meal in a day when houses weren't separated, and they'd established early a habit of sitting near the join of the two tables so they were adjacent rather than across the hall. No, Wednesday said. They're treating me cautiously. That's almost worse. It's actually better, she said. Caution means they're thinking. I can work with people who are thinking. She ate a piece of toast. Malfoy is interesting. Harry raised an eyebrow. I told him at Malkin's that he was leading with hierarchy because it's the thing his family is best at, she said. He thought about it. I can tell, his posture is different. He's been told his whole life that his blood is the point. Someone suggesting his approach is a limitation rather than an asset seems to have genuinely occupied him. She looked at her plate. He's not stupid. He's been educated badly. Are you defending Draco Malfoy? I'm diagnosing him, Wednesday said. There's a difference. The first flying lesson was with Gryffindor and Slytherin together, which Harry suspected was deliberate school architecture. He hadn't flown before, brooms hadn't been part of Grandmama's curriculum, and stood beside his broom in the October cold and felt it the way he felt everything, looking for the logic. Neville Longbottom went up immediately, involuntarily, before Madame Hooch had given the instruction, because his broom lurched upward the moment he set up and Neville had the quality of someone things happened around rather than to. He went up, he was thrown, he fell, he landed, and in the sequence of it a glass ball from his robes went bouncing across the grass. Draco Malfoy picked it up. He held it up with the expression of someone about to perform a cruelty that was also a performance, which was the most common kind. He was on his broom before Hooch had returned from walking Neville to the hospital wing, saying something about having it evaluated and then Neville getting it back. Harry was on his broom before Draco was. He'd never flown and it didn't matter. His magic reached the broom the same way it reached everything, responsive, warm, immediate. He went up and it was like nothing he'd experienced, the cold air and the height and the specific freedom of a thing with no walls, and he felt his magic surge upward with him, and he pointed the broom at Draco. Put it down, Harry said. Draco looked at him. They were 30 feet up and Harry's robes were moving in the wind and he looked entirely comfortable there, which was not what Draco had expected on a first flying lesson. You've never flown before, Draco said. You're a first year. Put it down, Harry said again. Or what? Or I'll take it, Harry said simply. Something in Draco's expression shifted. Not quite capitulation. More like the moment in a game when you realize the other player has seen more of the board than you. He looked at Harry's face, not threatening, not angry, just present and certain, and then he looked at the glass ball and then he threw it. Not at Harry. Not at the ground. He threw it high and wide, a deflection, the choice of someone who was changing the terms so neither side had lost. Harry caught it. Barely had to move the broom to do it, the broom responded to his intent before his body had consciously directed it. He came back down and landed in front of the class, which had been watching from the ground with the collective held breath of a group witnessing something that had departed from the expected script. Professor McGonagall appeared from the castle doors at a pace that suggested she'd been watching from a window. Harry braced for the kind of response Dudley used to get him in trouble with, the preemptive trouble, where the adult in question decided the outcome before hearing anything. He held the glass ball and waited. McGonagall looked at him with her particular expression, precise, contained, with something behind it that wasn't visible until you knew to look for it. That, she said, was remarkable flying for a first lesson. "Thank you," Harry said. "Come with me," she said, and her voice was clipped but her eyes were doing something else, and she took him inside and up 2 floors and into an office where she knocked on a door and introduced him, almost immediately, to Oliver Wood, who was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain and who looked at Harry as though Christmas had arrived in October. Seeker, it turned out, was a position that suited Harry's particular way of knowing where things were before he looked directly at them. He wrote to Wednesday that night, "They put me on the Quidditch team. Youngest in a century apparently." "I know," she wrote back. McGonagall told Snape at dinner. His expression was interesting. "Interesting how?" "He was proud," she wrote. "Very briefly. He hid it immediately. But it was there." A pause. "He'll make your life difficult in potions for the next 2 weeks to compensate." Harry laughed. Actually laughed, out loud, in the empty dormitory. "How do you know that?" "Because that's what people do when they feel something they don't want to feel," she wrote. "They punish the source." He lay back on his bed and stared at the canopy. Outside the tower window the grounds were dark and the lake was darker and Hogwarts breathed around him with its ancient specific breath. "Have you found the 3rd floor corridor yet?" he wrote. "Yes," she wrote. "The door is warded. Multiple layers, recent ones on top of old ones. Someone added to existing school magic. Not Dumbledore's style, more functional, less elegant. Multiple casters. What's behind it?" "Not sure yet," she wrote. "But I could feel the dog from outside the door." Harry sat up. "Dog?" "A large one," she wrote. 3 heartbeats. It's 3 separate animals in one body or one animal with 3 hearts." A pause. "I think the latter. It's calmer than 3 animals would be." Harry thought about Dumbledore's letters. The repeated mentions of the stone. The Philosopher's Stone. Immortality and the elixir of life, and Voldemort not dead, and something significant being protected at Hogwarts. 3-headed dog, he wrote. "What's it guarding?" "A trapdoor," she wrote. "Under its feet. I could feel the seal through the floor. The trapdoor opens down. There are further enchantments below, different styles, which means different casters. It's a series of obstacles." "How do you know all this from outside a door?" "Because I paid attention in Gringotts," she wrote. "Intent detection architecture. If you understand the principle you can feel the edges of anything that runs on similar principles. The trapdoor has wards that respond to intent, they're sensitive enough that I could feel them through the door even without touching it." A pause. "Someone built this recently. The school magic is ancient. This is new. Someone brought the dog here and built the obstacle course this summer." "Dumbledore," Harry wrote. "Probably not alone," Wednesday wrote. "Snape's style is in the layering, he works in sequences. The most recent layer on the door feels like his." She paused again. "And there's something else. A specific signature that I don't recognize. Something frightened." "Frightened?" "Magic carries intent," she wrote. "Basic theory. The intent of the caster leaves traces. One of the casters below the trapdoor was frightened when they cast. Not the healthy careful kind of frightened. The kind that belongs to someone who knows something is wrong and is doing this anyway." Harry stared at the parchment. He thought about Quirrell, who taught defense against the dark arts, who stuttered and wore a purple turban and moved through the corridors with the quality of someone bracing for impact at every turn. "Quirrell," he wrote. I thought so too, she wrote. His classroom smells like the trapdoor corridor. A very brief pause. And garlic. He claims the garlic is to keep vampires away. Is that plausible? Garlic doesn't keep vampires away, Wednesday wrote. I grew up around vampires. They find garlic mildly unpleasant, not prohibitive. It's not a deterrent. It's a cover. Cover for what? Something else, Wednesday wrote. Something he doesn't want people to smell through. Harry held the parchment and thought about a frightened man layering his classroom in garlic, and a trapdoor with his magical signature on it, and Voldemort not dead and interested in the stone. He thought about Dumbledore building an obstacle course and then telling an 11-year-old about the stone repeatedly in letters, over years, in passing, as though it were just interesting history. He wants us to find it, Harry wrote. He wants you to find it, Wednesday wrote. He's built it so you have to. The obstacles are defeatable by the specific skills he knows you have, or that he thinks you have. It's a test. Of what? Of whether his plan works, she wrote. Whether you're what he made you to be. Harry looked at that sentence for a long time. What do we do? He wrote. We go through the trapdoor, Wednesday wrote. But on our terms and on our schedule, not because he maneuvered us into it. A pause. And we need to know what Quirrell is. Before we go anywhere near that corridor properly. How do we find out? I already know a way, she wrote. Halloween. What happens at Halloween? Something always happens at Halloween, Wednesday wrote, and he could hear in the phrasing the exact tone of her voice when she said it. It's practically a rule. Halloween arrived and brought, as Wednesday had predicted with the certainty of seasonal knowledge, a troll in the dungeons. Harry heard it from the Great Hall, where the Halloween feast was taking place under carved pumpkins the size of boulders and enough floating candles to constitute a fire hazard. He heard it because Quirrell ran in screaming about it, which was the least convincing acting Harry had observed in his 11 years, and then fainted, which made it worse. Dumbledore ordered the students to their dormitories in the controlled voice of a man who was managing a plan. Harry looked across the hall at Wednesday, who was already standing. She was looking at Quirrell's fallen form with the sharp attention of a very specific thought. Harry stood. He met Ron's eyes, Ron, who had the instincts of someone who'd grown up around danger and had therefore developed a fairly accurate danger detector. We're going, Harry said. Ron looked at the chaos of students being herded by prefects. Where? To find what the troll is actually a distraction from, Wednesday said, appearing beside them. Ron looked between them. He had the expression of someone who knew this was probably the worst idea of the evening and was going to do it anyway. Right, he said. Brilliant. Let's go. They went against the tide of students, which was easier than it sounded because most students were moving fast and in one direction and not paying attention to anyone going the other way. They found Hermione in a bathroom corridor. She hadn't been in the hall, Harry realized, and she was trying to press herself against the wall away from something large that was around the corner that was definitely a troll. Behind me, Wednesday said, and walked around the corner. The troll was large in the way that made large seem like an inadequate word, 12 feet of gray, thick-skinned, small-eyed, and waving a club with the enthusiasm of something that hadn't yet found what it was looking for. It looked at Wednesday and blinked. Wednesday looked back at it. She raised her wand. The troll swung its club and Wednesday stepped aside with the precision of someone who'd been practicing avoiding things since she was 4 and crouched beside Grandmama's biting plant had made evasion personally relevant. She cast twice in rapid sequence, not the same spell both times, because Wednesday never did anything twice the same way when the second time could be different. The troll sat down. Heavily. Then lay down. Its eyes closed. Is it dead? Ron asked. No, Wednesday said. It's sleeping. It'll wake up with a headache and no memory of the last hour. She lowered her wand. We need to move. Quirrell went the other way when everyone was sent to dormitories. They ran. They found Snape on the third-floor corridor before they found Quirrell, which was both a complication and an explanation. He was outside the door, wand out, with blood on his robes from something on his leg, and he looked at Harry and Wednesday with an expression of several things at once. "Go back," he said. "Where's Quirrell?" Harry said. Something moved in Snape's expression. "Go back. You're bleeding," Wednesday said, with the calm of someone stating a weather condition. The door was opened. "When? How long ago?" Snape looked at her and she looked back, and in the exchange between them was the specific recognition of two people who had both put things together and reached the same answer. "Not long enough," Snape said. "It's not a straight path. If he's in there now, then we go now," Harry said. "You're 11, Snape said. "I'm aware," Harry said. Snape looked at him. In the greenlit corridor outside the door to the third floor, the portraits on the walls watched with the attention of witnesses, and Snape looked at this boy who had his mother's eyes and his father's face and 5 years of Addams family education and was standing in front of him with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once been successfully told to stay where he was put. "The dog responds to music," Snape said. "He said it the way you said things you'd decided to say before you decided to decide it. Curt and brief and then done." "I know," Wednesday said. "I've been playing to it through the door for 2 weeks." Snape looked at her. "You've been, preparation," she said. "We're going through now." Snape stepped aside. The door opened, and the dog was already calm because Wednesday had her wand raised before the door finished moving, and the low continuous note she produced settled the enormous three-headed creature before it had time to decide on violence. Harry went through the trapdoor. Wednesday followed. The dark swallowed them. Chapter 6, The Philosopher's Stone. The trapdoor dropped them into Devil's Snare, which was a plant that responded to panic and stillness in opposite ways, and the first thing Wednesday said when they landed in it was, "Don't move," and Harry, who had spent 5 years learning that Wednesday's instructions in high-stakes situations were structurally sound, went still immediately. Ron had not come through the trapdoor. He'd been at the door when Snape stepped aside, and Wednesday had looked at him with her particular look, the one that communicated things without requiring words, and Ron had understood something in it because he was smarter than he usually got credit for, and he'd stayed. Someone needed to stay. Someone needed to know where they'd gone. Ron had the look of someone who'd figured this out and didn't love it but accepted it, and he'd taken the door. So it was Harry and Wednesday in the Devil's Snare, and Wednesday was completely still, and the plant was deciding about them. "It'll release in a moment," Wednesday said, in the low unhurried voice she used when she was working. Devil's Snare is herbology, which means Sprout's contribution to the obstacle course. It's sensory, it reads physiological stress markers, heart rate, muscle tension, cortisol production. If you're calm, it loses interest. "I know," Harry said. He was watching the tendrils around his arms. "I'm calm." "I know you're calm," she said. "I'm talking to fill the silence so the silence doesn't make you less calm." Harry looked at her across the dim space. She was suspended in the plant's grip with the exact serenity of someone who'd been in worse situations and had done so on purpose. The pale light from somewhere below touched her face and she looked like a portrait, those still dark eyes, the 2 braids, the expression that was complete and self-sufficient and waiting. "That's considerate of you," he said. "Don't make it strange," she said. The plant released them and they dropped into a long stone chamber that smelled of old magic and something sharper beneath it, and the second obstacle announced itself with the sound of wings. Keys. Hundreds of them, flying, enchanted, each one a different size and shape and age, and at the far end a locked door. A broomstick leaning against the wall. Harry picked up the broomstick and went up before Wednesday had finished examining the lock. He moved between the swarming keys with the ease that had gotten him a seeker position, reading the space around him the way he read the Quidditch pitch, in terms of motion, trajectory, the logic of how things moved. He was looking for the one key that matched the lock, which meant old, probably, This door was old, the lock was iron, and it looked like something that had been here before Dumbledore put his obstacle course around it. He found it in 40 seconds, large, iron, one wing bent from recent catching, and had it in the lock in another 10. Efficient, Wednesday said, from the doorway. Flannery teaches us to read motion patterns, Harry said, handing her the broomstick. Flannery was the Quidditch coach who'd been working with him since October. Once you know how something moves, you can predict where it's going to be. Same principle as reading intent detection architecture, Wednesday said. Patterns tell you more than positions. You could have said something more impressed, Harry said. That was impressed, she said. The third chamber was the chess room, and it was enormous, and the pieces were the size of small horses, carved stone, waiting with the patience of things that didn't need to go anywhere until they were needed. Wednesday looked at it for 3 seconds. Knight to e5, she said. Then bishop to c4. Then queen to h4. Harry looked at the board. That's 4 moves. 3, she said. The third move ends it. The queen takes the king's guard and the opposing king falls. They're enchanted to follow the logic of real chess, which means forced checkmate is compulsory. The king will concede. She was already moving to the appropriate pieces and placing her hand on the white queen with the authority of someone who'd been playing against Gomez since she was 4, which meant playing against someone who treated chess as a venue for emotional investment and unexpected aggression simultaneously. Harry took the knight because the knight had the most complicated movement and he could feel its logic, the L shape, the way it skipped over pieces, the specific freedom of the least conventional piece. It took 4 minutes. The stone king tipped. The door at the far end unlocked with a sound like something substantial conceding. The fourth chamber smelled wrong from 20 feet out, and Wednesday stopped walking and put her arm across Harry's chest. Potions, she said. The room had a table with 7 bottles of different colors and shapes, and flames blocking both doors, black flame at the entrance, purple at the exit, and a rolled piece of parchment. Wednesday read the parchment. Harry read it over her shoulder. It was a logic puzzle, a riddle about the bottles. Snape, Harry said. Yes, Wednesday said. She was already examining the bottles, not touching, looking at the quality of the light through them, the color, the way each one caught what light there was in the burning room. He's good, she said, and it wasn't a compliment exactly, but it had the quality of one. Can you solve it? Already have, she said. She pointed at a small round bottle, deep violet. This one gets us through the black fire. The nettle wine, she pointed at the largest bottle, is irrelevant. It's there to tempt someone who decides the smallest bottle is the answer and the wine is the fallback. She looked at the bottles for another moment. He's built in exactly one false choice. For someone who was rushing or frightened it would work. We're not rushing, Harry said. No, Wednesday said. She picked up the violet bottle and drank half of it and handed it to Harry, and they went through the black flame, which was cold rather than hot, cold in the way of something that had been told to burn and was doing it on principle rather than with feeling. The fifth chamber. A room of mirrors, which was unexpected and which Wednesday moved through without breaking stride, ignoring the reflections the way someone who'd grown up in a house full of honest mirrors learned to, looking through them rather than at them, reading the space beyond the glass rather than the image on its surface. The sixth was darkness, absolute, and Harry put out his hand and found Wednesday's, and she took it without comment, and they walked through it together by the logic of the space, feeling the walls at arm's length, reading the floor for changes in level, until the door appeared ahead as a very faint line of different dark. And then the seventh chamber. And Professor Quirrell. He was standing at the far end of the room, which was lit by blue-white light from a source Harry couldn't immediately locate, and he had his back to them when they entered. He was very still. The blue light made the room feel like the inside of something rather than the outside, like being swallowed. I was wondering which of you would come, Quirrell said. He turned around, and his face was wrong. Not in the way it was usually wrong, the stuttering, the flinching, the quality of someone permanently braced for impact. Those things were gone. What was left was the face of someone who'd stopped performing. Both of you. That's unexpected. I doubt it, Wednesday said. You knew we were watching the corridor. Quirrell looked at her with pale eyes that had lost the quality of fear and replaced it with something flatter. Clever girl, he said. Yes, she said, without the question implied by the phrase affecting her. What are you specifically? Quirrell tilted his head. The gesture was wrong, too fluid, not quite the movement of a man turning his head. Something underneath it, slightly displaced. Specific is an interesting question, he said. I was a scholar. I was curious about things that curious people aren't supposed to be curious about. And then I went looking. He took a step toward them. And I found something considerably more significant than I was. Harry's eyes were on the room. He was reading it the way he read everything, motion, intent, the shape of what was here. The blue light was coming from an object at the back of the room. He could feel it from here, the specific warmth of something with enormous magical weight, and underneath that warmth the quality of something very old. The mirror. He remembered the mirror. Dumbledore had mentioned it once, in a letter, as an interesting historical object, which meant it was significant. Eriste was the name on the frame, he could read it backwards from here. It showed you what you most wanted. But there was something else about it, something Dumbledore had written into the letter so carefully that the care itself was a signal. Only someone who wanted to find it but not use it could actually retrieve it, Dumbledore had written. About something. About something he hadn't named. The stone. Harry looked at the mirror. Quirrell was still talking. He had the quality of someone who'd been isolated long enough that speech had become something he did for himself rather than for others. Lord Voldemort has been very patient, he said. Patient in the way that things without bodies are patient, they have very little else to do. He touched his turban with one hand, briefly, a gesture that was an adjustment. Something else. Wednesday was watching the turban. Harry watched her watching it and understood simultaneously. He's here, Harry said. Quirrell stopped his pacing. Perceptive, he said. Under the turban, Wednesday said. Quirrell's smile was the most genuinely strange thing about him. The girl is extraordinary, he said, and it wasn't directed at them. It was directed inward, toward whatever wore the turban as a second face. Yes. My lord has been, sharing my body since Albania. It has its inconveniences. He touched the turban again. But the rewards are considerable. The stone is in the mirror, Harry said. I need to look at it. That's rather what I need you for, Quirrell said. The enchantment your headmaster placed on it is annoyingly specific. The only person who can retrieve it is someone who wants it but wouldn't use it. He moved to the side, a clearing gesture. So. Look. Wednesday said, don't. Harry looked at her. She was watching Quirrell with those complete, methodical eyes. The enchantment works both ways, she said. If you retrieve it, it exists. It can be taken. If it stays in the mirror it doesn't exist in a form anyone can use, including you. She looked at Harry directly. He needs you to take it out. Once it's out of the mirror it's real. Very good, said a voice that wasn't Quirrell's. It came from the turban, and it was thin and high and cold in the way that cold was the absence of something rather than a thing in itself. It had the quality of something that had been existing at low power for a long time and had developed patience out of necessity. Miss Addams, said the voice of Voldemort. I've heard a great deal about you. The Addams family has always sat at an interesting distance from the magical world, close enough to matter, far enough to be their own thing. A pause that had the quality of something thinking. I respect it. You don't need to talk to me, Wednesday said. I'm curious about you. I'm not curious about you, she said. I've read enough about you to know what you are. And what am I? Afraid, she said. The word sat in the blue-lit room. Quirrell's body went very still. I have power that makes afraid irrelevant, the voice said, and for the first time something moved in it, not anger, something sharper. The thing that moves in people when they hear true things said about them by people they decided couldn't see them. You invented Horcruxes, Wednesday said. Pieces of yourself, stored in objects, kept separate from your body so you couldn't die completely. That's not power. That's the most sophisticated form of hiding I've ever heard of. She tilted her head, and in the blue light she looked like something very old looking at something that thought it was very old. You are so afraid of death that you've spent your entire magical career hiding from it. Everything you've done, the war, the followers, the terror, all of it, is the project of someone who found out they were mortal and could not accept it. The room was silent. Then, Quirrell, said the voice, and it had changed register. Kill the girl. Quirrell raised his wand. Harry moved. Not toward Quirrell. Toward the mirror. He understood in the instant of movement what Wednesday had done. She'd known, had known from the moment they entered the room, that this was where it was going, and she'd done what she did, talked, precisely and at the exact pressure point, until the thing she was talking to stopped thinking about everything except what she'd said, and in that moment of stop thinking had created the opening she needed. She stepped aside from Quirrell's spell with the same calm economy she'd stepped aside from everything, the biting plant, the devil's snare's tendrils, Quirrell's body moving toward her now with the specific purpose of something that had nothing left to calculate. Harry looked into the mirror. He didn't see himself holding a red stone, which was what Quirrell had described, which was what Dumbledore's enchantment was designed around, someone who wanted to find it but wouldn't use it. He saw his parents. Lily and James Potter, living and laughing, the same people from the photograph in the vault, and in this version they turned and looked at him with the full attention of people who knew he was there, and his mother's green eyes, his eyes, looked at him with recognition, not the photograph kind, not the frozen kind, the kind that meant something. He felt the stone in his pocket. He looked down. His hand was in his pocket and the stone was there, smooth, heavy, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He hadn't reached for it. It had come to him in the way his magic came to him, the way the wand had felt right in Ollivander's, the way the broom had felt right 30 feet above the Quidditch pitch. The enchantment had worked exactly as designed. He wanted it but not for himself. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban. He thought about the sealed guardianship record. He thought about Dumbledore's letters, careful and patterned and withholding. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about the lock on the outside of the door, about a gray blanket and a torn picture book. He thought about 5 years of being allowed to grow into himself in a house that was entirely honest about what it was. He closed his fingers around the stone and turned away from the mirror. Behind him, Wednesday had Quirrell against the wall. Not physically. She hadn't touched him. She had her wand leveled and she'd been casting in the silence of Harry's mirror moment, and she'd built something around Quirrell that was partly restraint and partly something else, something older and colder than standard school magic, something that had come from Grandmama's grimoires and had the specific architectural quality of Wednesday's best work. Quirrell was shaking. His hands were against the wall behind him and he was shaking with the specific quality of someone who has tried several things and found that nothing is working. The voice from the turban was silent. Interesting, Wednesday said, looking at the restraint she'd built. She wasn't gloating. She was genuinely observing. The enchantment responds to him but not to Voldemort. They're sharing a body but they have distinct magical signatures. She looked at Quirrell's face. He's not the dominant one right now. Voldemort is. He'll have a Horcrux here, Harry said, from behind her. We don't know where, Wednesday said. I can feel it, Harry said, and it was true, the weight of the stone in his pocket had sensitized something in him, the way tuning an instrument made you hear frequency differently. Something in the room had the same quality, the weighted wrongness of something that had been used for a wrong purpose. It's the diary. In his bag. Quirrell's eyes moved involuntarily. Just a flicker. His bag was at the wall below the mirror. Wednesday pointed her wand at it. Accio, she said, and it was one of her cleanest spells, the kind that came from absolute intent rather than effort, and the bag flew to her hand and she opened it with the detachment of someone performing a task rather than a violation. The diary was old and black and ordinary-looking, and Wednesday held it by the spine and felt whatever it was she felt about things, and her expression shifted by the increment it shifted when she found something she'd been looking for. "Yes," she said. "This is it." "What do we do with it?" Harry said. Wednesday put the diary on the floor. She looked at it. She looked at the ring on her finger, black stone, old silver, a ring she'd been wearing since her 7th birthday when Grandmama gave it to her with instructions that it was for situations of specific severity and she would know when. She took off the ring. She placed it on the diary. The ring contained, Grandmama had explained, a binding from the family's oldest tradition, not a destruction, exactly, but a permanent separation of something from its anchor. The magic in it was the kind that had no name in standard wizarding texts because it had been developed outside the wizarding world's classification system entirely, and it worked on the simple principle that some things should not be allowed to persist. The diary went still in a way that was different from the still it had been. Then the leather cover cracked. Not dramatically, quietly, a small sound, the sound of something releasing rather than breaking. The crack ran along the spine and the pages went yellow and then fell quiet. "Done," Wednesday said. She picked up her ring and put it back on. Quirrell collapsed. Not the way people collapsed when they fainted, dramatically, with warning. He folded, the way things folded when what was holding them up was gone. He hit the floor and lay still, and the turban came loose as he fell, and Harry looked at the back of Quirrell's head and then looked away, because what was there was wrong in a way that warranted not being looked at longer than necessary. The blue light in the room changed quality. Something left it. Not physically, the light was the same light, but the thing that had been in the room that was Voldemort, the specific cold weight of his presence, was different now. Diminished. Not gone, Harry could still feel the threat of it, very thin, very distant, the quality of something that had been cut from its anchor and was now simply surviving in the way things survived when they had nowhere else to go. The stone in Harry's pocket was warm and still. He looked at it in his palm. Red, smooth, the size of a large walnut. It caught the blue light and held it. This was the thing that could make the elixir of life, that could theoretically end death as a natural conclusion for one person, and it sat in his hand and felt very small for what it represented. "What do we do with it?" he said, for the second time. Wednesday looked at the stone. She looked at it for longer than she looked at most things, and Harry watched her and waited, because this was the quality of thinking that needed the time it took. "Nicholas Flamel is a real person," she said finally. "He made the stone. He's 600 years old. He and his wife have been using the elixir for centuries." She paused. "Dumbledore moved the stone here to protect it from Voldemort, but the protection was temporary. It was always going to be found eventually." She looked at Harry. "The stone is an object of permanent interest to anyone who wants to live forever. As long as it exists, someone will come for it. So we destroy it?" Harry said. "That's one option," Wednesday said. "Flamel would have to die. His wife too." "They're 600 years old," Harry said. "Yes," Wednesday said. "They are." Harry held the stone and thought about living 600 years, about what you accumulated in 600 years, what you lost, what you forgot, what persisted. He thought about his parents in the mirror, alive for 31 years, both of them, 31 years of accumulated love and loyalty and ordinary specific moments that had ended in a house in Godric's Hollow on a Halloween night. "We give it back to Flamel," he said. "Directly. Not through Dumbledore." He closed his fingers around the stone. "And we tell Flamel what happened. What it's been used for, what it's been through. He decides." Wednesday looked at him. In the specific vocabulary of her face, this was the expression she had when someone said something she agreed with so completely that she had nothing to add. It lasted about 2 seconds. "Yes," she said. "That's right. They walked back through the obstacle course in reverse, which was simpler than the forward journey because most of the obstacles were designed to stop people going in, not out, and Wednesday had already mapped the logic of each one. The chess pieces had reset, but she walked through the board on the edge, along the wall, where the enchantment's jurisdiction didn't reach because it had been built to occupy the center of the room. The key room was easy because Harry still had the right key in his hand. He'd kept hold of it, which was an instinct from the same category as his seeker instinct, holding on to things until you knew you were definitely done needing them. The devil's snare released them without event because they were both still, and this time the stillness was a different kind, not the performed calm of someone managing their adrenaline but the genuine stillness of two people who had done what they went to do and were finished. They came up through the trapdoor and the three-headed dog was asleep and Wednesday was still producing the steady low note from her wand and she maintained it all the way to the door, which she closed behind them. Snape was in the corridor. He looked at them. His expression went through the compressed complexity it went through when several things happened simultaneously that he hadn't prepared for, and what came out the other side was something that was difficult to name but that Harry thought, privately, might be closest to relief. Quirrell. Snape said. Incapacitated, Wednesday said. He had Voldemort with him. Past tense, mostly. There's still a threat of him, but without the Horcrux and without a physical anchor he has significantly reduced options. Snape went still at the word Horcrux. Then he went very still, the specific way he went still when something surprised him that he wasn't going to give the dignity of showing. You know what that is, Wednesday said. Yes, Snape said. How many are there? A long pause. The corridor was greenlit and quiet and the portraits were awake and watching. More than one, Snape said. I don't know the full count. We need to, Wednesday said. We'll talk about this. You're 11, Snape said. Not dismissively. More like a man reminding himself of a fact. You're aware that's not a relevant consideration, Wednesday said. Snape looked at her and made the specific sound he made when he was declining to argue a point he'd lost. It wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't quite a sigh. It was something in between that belonged entirely to Snape. He looked at Harry. The stone, he said. Harry opened his hand. Snape looked at it. Then looked at Harry. We're returning it to Flamel, Harry said. Directly. Dumbledore, we're returning it to Flamel, Harry said again. Dumbledore can be informed. He held the stone and felt the warm weight of it and thought about Dumbledore at the staff table, going still when Wednesday was sorted to Slytherin, going still in the Addams sitting room when he recalibrated the plan. He used it as bait, Harry said. It's not his to return. Snape was quiet for a moment that contained several things. I'll send the message to Flamel, he said. I know how. He said it the way he said things he'd decided, curt and complete and not revisited. Harry nodded. Thank you, he said. Snape looked at him again with those eyes that were doing several things at once, and one of the things this time was the same thing it had been in the potions classroom when Harry had given 3 correct answers in a row, that brief, quickly managed warmth. Don't, Snape said, reflexively. Professor, Harry said. Snape raised an eyebrow. I know about my mother, Harry said. I figured it out. Not what you felt, that's yours. But I know she was your friend. He paused, and it was a careful pause, the kind Wednesday had taught him by example, the kind that gave things the weight they were worth. I think she was extraordinary. Snape said nothing. But his jaw moved, very slightly, and he looked away, and when he looked back his expression was what it always was, contained, precise, cool, except for the one thing underneath it that he hadn't managed in time, and Harry saw it and filed it away with the particular care he gave to things that mattered. Go to your dormitory, Snape said, and walked past them toward the door to the 3rd floor. They went. Dumbledore came to Harry and Wednesday together, which was a choice. He came the next morning, to the hospital wing where Madame Pomfrey had installed them both with the specific authority of a woman for whom being in a hospital wing was not optional once she'd decided it was necessary, and he sat in the chair between their beds with his half-moon spectacles and his pale clear eyes and his hands folded in his lap. He looked at them for a moment. Then, you went through, he said. Yes, Harry said. Both of you. Yes. I see. His voice was even. His expression was several things. And Quirrell? In the chamber, Wednesday said. Alive, last we saw. Voldemort's primary anchor in this world has been dealt with, so Quirrell's situation is, simplified. Dumbledore looked at her. You destroyed a Horcrux, he said, and it was not quite a question. Yes, Wednesday said. How did you know what it was? Theory, Wednesday said. The magical signature of an object used to house a piece of a person's soul has specific characteristics. I identified the signature by extrapolation from texts about anchored intent magic. She looked at him steadily. You knew about the Horcruxes. I suspected, Dumbledore said. I've been researching it for years. How many are there? Wednesday asked. A pause. Dumbledore's expression was the expression of a man deciding how much of a decision to make. I believe, he said carefully, that there are more. I don't yet know the precise number. But you're looking, Harry said. Yes. And you were going to tell us, Harry said. At some point. When your plan required it. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, this 11-year-old with his mother's eyes and 5 years of Addams family education and the Philosopher's Stone, which he'd retrieved from inside the mirror and then decided independently to return to its maker, and something moved through his expression that was more honest than most things he showed. Yes, he said. When I thought the time was right. That's the problem, Harry said. You decide what time is right. For things that are mine. He looked at Dumbledore without hostility, with the same calm directness he'd used at 6 years old in the Addams sitting room and never stopped using. My parents. The wand connection. The guardianship record. Sirius Black. The names sat between them. Dumbledore went very still. Sirius Black, Harry said again, and his voice was steady and specific, because this was the thing that was most his, the thing that had been stored since Wednesday said sealed records are sealed for a reason and Harry had put it away until the right moment. Who is in Azkaban for killing Peter Pettigrew? Who Pettigrew appears to not certainly be dead. Who is, I believe, my godfather, which is in a sealed record that you sealed. He looked at Dumbledore. I want to know. Dumbledore sat with this for a long time. The hospital wing was quiet, morning light through the high windows, the smell of potions and clean linen. Sirius Black is your godfather, Dumbledore said. That is true. Is he guilty? Another silence, longer. I don't know, Dumbledore said. And for once, Harry thought, it was the exact truth, not a selection, not a managed truth, just the unprocessed thing. I believed he was. I had reasons to believe he was. But in recent years, certain things have come to my attention that have made me less certain than I was. Pettigrew, Wednesday said. There are indications, Dumbledore said carefully, that he may not be dead. Exactly. Then Sirius Black is in Azkaban for something he may not have done, Harry said, and has been for 10 years, and you're less certain than you were. He looked at Dumbledore. That isn't good enough. No, Dumbledore said quietly. It isn't. They sat with that. Harry watched the old man across from him, the star-scattered robes, the half-moon spectacles, the pale eyes that were always doing several things at once, and thought about plans and components and the difference between genuinely doing right and being absolutely convinced that you were. I'm not your enemy, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. But you're not simply mine to direct, Dumbledore said. He said it the way people said things they'd just arrived at, the sound of a conclusion being reached out loud. No, Harry said. I'm not. Wednesday said nothing. She was watching Dumbledore with those complete, methodical eyes, and Harry could read in the quality of her silence that she thought this was going as well as it could and was not going to interfere with it. "I will tell you everything I know," Dumbledore said. "About the Horcruxes. About Sirius. About the full shape of what Voldemort was and what returning would require." He looked at Harry. "Not because my plan requires it. Because you're right that it's yours to know." "Today?" Harry said. "Today," Dumbledore said. "If Madame Pomfrey will release you." "She'll release me," Wednesday said. "She said rest," Harry said. "She said rest was advisable," Wednesday corrected. "Those are different statements." "She was already sitting up." "We'll need a private room. And Snape should be there. He knows things you haven't told each other." Dumbledore looked at her with something in his expression that was entirely genuine, entirely surprised, and entirely unlike anything Harry had seen in him before. It was the expression of someone who'd been planning a game and discovered that the other players had been planning something else entirely, something better, something that made the original game look small. "Yes," he said. "All right." He went to find Snape. Wednesday looked at Harry across the hospital wing. Morning light made the room brighter than it had been, and outside the windows Hogwarts was its full specific self, grounds and lake and forest and towers and all the accumulated history of a place that had been doing something real for 1,000 years. "Are you all right?" Wednesday asked. Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the mirror and his parents and the stone in his palm. He thought about Quirrell and the cold voice from the turban and the Horcrux going quiet under the pressure of Grandmama's binding. He thought about Snape's face when he'd mentioned his mother, and Dumbledore's face just now, and the feeling of the trapdoor dropping them into the dark and neither of them hesitating. "Yes," he said. "Actually." "Good," she said. She got out of bed and found her robes and her wand and the small black notebook she'd been carrying since September 1st, which had considerably more in it now than it had when they'd boarded the train. She opened it to a new page and wrote something brief at the top. Harry looked at it from his bed. Known Horcruxes, 1, destroyed. Unknown quantity remaining. Pettigrew status, unclear. Black, Sirius, imprisoned, possibly wrongly. Voldemort, diminished, not gone. Underneath that, in Wednesday's precise handwriting, next. Harry got out of bed. He found his wand and his jacket and the stone, which he'd been keeping in his pocket because it was his responsibility until Flamel had it, and the photographs from the vault, which he transferred to the jacket when they'd left the chamber and which he kept there now with the uncomplicated decision of someone who'd stopped needing permission to hold the things that belonged to him. Next, he agreed. They went to meet Dumbledore and Snape in a private room on the 3rd floor, where the morning came through the windows at a good angle and the portraits on the walls were awake and willing to witness, and the conversation that happened there was long and detailed and, for the first time, genuinely between equals, not a man with a plan talking to pieces of it, but 4 people who were each holding part of something and needed to put it on the same table. Harry held his part. Wednesday held hers. Snape, after a silence that lasted exactly as long as his pride required and no longer, held his. Dumbledore held his, and it was larger than the others, and some of it was hard to hold, and he held it anyway, because whatever else was true about Albus Dumbledore, he was not, in the end, someone who preferred Comfortab more actions. Claude Sonnet 4.